This episode of Drawn to It podcast is brought to you by Cat Animation Online Art School, offering their students high-quality mentoring by experienced, caring professionals in animation, story design, and much more at very affordable prices. Beginning and advanced classes and mentoring slots for the spring semester of 2021 are forming now. Don't miss the opportunity to learn and grow from Disney-trained animators and artists currently working in the animation industry. Visit www.cat-animation.com for details about their unique school, their distinguished faculty, and how to apply for future classes or mentoring. They look forward to working with you in the near future. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Drawn to It podcast. This episode, we have 2D animator, instructor, author, and all-round super 2D animation talent, Brian Lemay, right here on Drawn to It podcast.
Drawn to it, sketching doodles in your textbooks. In the corners, making animation flip books. Writing stories, then turn them into comics. Shucks, get out the clay, I'm a sculpt Garth Brooks. It doesn't matter how you create, cause you're...
I've been really nervous about having you on because as a student who trained under you, I mean, you were the most intimidating figure in my day-to-day life for, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And, it's just funny when you're a student, you really put your professors up on a pedestal because they're at a level that you're scraping and clawing trying to get to, right?
Right.
And so this is a little intimidating for me. I'm not gonna lie.
No, don't be intimidated. I mean, we're peers now.
Yeah, that's
So
that's weird.
Totally different. No,
That's
wow.
As I mentioned in the email, I like to talk about that high school year when people are deciding what they're going to do with the rest of their life, because it's something we all relate to. We were all right there, right?
That's
And some of us had parents pressuring us to go into a trade, but we really wanted to learn how to draw cartoons, or parents who were like, you can be the next Disney. I didn't have that. So
right. Same here.
Yeah. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear what your process and journey was there.
Sure. So growing up, I had always been into cartoons a lot. Some of my earliest memories, I used to live in Regina with my parents, obviously, around the age of 5. So I was in kindergarten, and so 4 or 5 in that range. I remember distinctly coming home for lunch because the school was close by. It's not like schools today where you stay at school.
Yeah.
The school that I went to was probably maybe half a mile away, and you would walk there by yourself, and trust everybody to make sure that you got there on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember coming home at lunch and watching Roger Ramjet, and it was one of the very first introductions to animation that I ever had. And I loved the show. I absolutely adored the show. And it has been a sort of a guiding influence in my career all along. And we can talk more about, that stuff later on.
Yeah.
But that was my earliest influence. And then at age, I would say 12, was when I started to get into comic books. So this would have been 72, the golden age, or if you want to call it the silver age of Marvel Comics. And I bought some of my first comics during that time period. Conan the Barbarian #1.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
Which I bought 2 copies of it.
Yeah.
I'm 12 years old because they were only 12 cents back then. But that started the ball rolling on my comic book obsession that has lasted all through my entire life. And through my teen years, I latched onto comic books and Marvel in specific. And so I got into Spider-Man, et cetera, buying the newsstand copies. And it was my passion for my teenage years. And then that's when I decided I wanted to be a comic book artist. So I got through high school clumsily.
Me too.
All the art courses and everything, and I actually did very well. I recall when I was in grade 7 being taught perspective, And I latched onto it. I absolutely loved it. And in grade 8, I remember my grade 8 art teacher asking me to teach the class because I was so good at it.
Right.
I onto it. He asked me to teach the course, the class on perspective. And so that was my first introduction to teaching, which was somewhat, I don't understand how it happened or what, it just happened. But going into high school, I excelled in art quite a bit. I was your average student, testing things out, oil painting, watercolor painting, life drawing, not with nudes, but it was, other students getting up on the desktops and posing for us and drawing them. And I did very, very well at that.
Yeah.
Also, we had options. You could take the basic core classes, and then you had options of things that you wanted to take above and beyond or as extra classes. And I took a visual arts class, which was not art, but it was media and film. And I absolutely loved that course because earlier on, when I was a younger kid, and I guess I must have been 8 or 9 when I started doing my first animation, pixelation, using dump trucks and moving it a little bit and then taking a picture. My dad had an 8mm camera, which he got the little screw-on thing that allowed you to do single frames.
Wow, and you were lucky. You were lucky. So, most of us had to push release. You never know how many frames you got. So.
Well, that happened to me when I was in grade 7. I chose as one of my English assignments to do an animation, and they didn't have the single frame, and so that's what it was. It was it turned out it looked like crap. I mean, it just did not. But very early on, I was doing a lot of filmmaking. Grabbing the camera. It's a lot like watching the Goldbergs on television. Adam Goldberg and his video.
One of my favorite shows.
Yeah. So that was me, but with an 8mm camera, and so I would make these little movies. I still have one movie that I did, which is basically a precursor to Rocky, where we cleared out the garage, and I was one of the actors and director. My father was the other actor. He was the fighter that I was going up against. My sister, who was 3 years younger than me, so she would have been maybe 6 or 7. She was the referee, and my mother was the cinematographer. And so what would happen was I had the whole film planned out, and the film must be about 8 minutes long total.
Wow.
And so I had the whole film planned out with all the different shots and everything in my head. And I would tell my mother, okay, you're supposed to stand here, and we'd set up the tripod and we'd take the shot. And I would go in front of the camera, and my dad and I would say, this is what we're going to do. And then we'd do it, we punching and fighting and boxing and whatnot. Yeah. And then I'd say, okay, now I want a down shot. So I'd get her up on this ladder in the garage, and she'd be up on the top of the ladder with the camera pointing down. And I say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And you follow me. When I move, you move with the camera. And so we did all that stuff. And then later on, I would take it to take the final film and cut it all up using the splicer and taping it all together. And
wow.
It turned out quite amazing. Actually, just recently, I put the audio of Eye of the Tiger with it, and it actually it plays very coolly.
That's awesome. You had a splicer?
Yeah, I actually had it. My dad got me a splicer, so I could play around with it. So that was my first film. And then later, when I was in grade 11, I did my opus, which was a parody of The $6 Million Man with a buddy of mine who I went to school with. And that film was 18 minutes long. And there was a lot of splicing. We had no sound, because it was an 8mm camera, so we had no sound at all. So I had a cassette recorder, and I would take it on the set and set it up on the set so that you couldn't see it with the microphone sticking out. And then we would go through and do the shots, and we had multiple takes and had to splice it. And so when I played it in the final class, it didn't quite work out because the audio did not sync up to the video. So I had to start and stop it several times, but I ended up getting an A+ in the class. And so that was my introduction to the visual medium of filmmaking. So now move forward to grade 12, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do going into college. Sheridan College. I lived in Georgetown which is just north of Oakville. And so Sheridan College was the logical choice of where to go for college. So they had at that time, this was in 1977, they had comic book art. And
wow.
Mike Plug, who was a DC artist at the time, and Creepy and various other magazines, very well-known artist. Yeah. He was the instructor, or the head instructor of the course. So I applied to the course, hoping to get into it, but they had decided they weren't going to run the course anymore. They just ended it. And so my only alternative in art was animation. So I figured out, what the heck, I'll get into animation. Right. So I applied, got accepted, and got into the course, and went through the Sheridan diploma program.
Did they have a portfolio requirement to get into it?
No, there was no portfolio at all. It was simply whatever your grades were, and
right.
If you could hold a pencil, basically.
Wow.
So that was 78 that I got in to the animation program, and let's see, who are the instructors? It was Bill Matthews was the main instructor for first year animation, and then there was Jim McCauley. I'm sure everybody has had some experience with it, went through Sheridan at some point up until the mid to 80s, I guess. Kai Pindle was one of our instructors. Tom Halley was the coordinator of the program. Trying to think of John Wheeler did visual language. We had Frank Miller, not the Frank Miller from comic book, but an instructor named Frank Miller was our technical drawing instructor who taught us perspective. Unfortunately, he died midway through first year. Oh, tragic story. I don't know why I'm laughing, but he died midway through the first year. He was a great instructor. I loved him, and that was because I excelled at perspective, and so we had this connection. And so that was sad that he had died that year. Those were the instructors during the time period,
and your peers in your class. I mean, they're from that time period of Sheridan is sort of where the big reputation has seeded from, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of two in that year.
Yeah,
that couple of years. Yeah. Bob Jakes was in my class. Did Ren and Stimpy, and he was a great guy, good friend. We used to watch Warner Brothers cartoons down in the flatbed room. We'd have a party at night, and he'd pull up. He I don't know how he got all these films, 16 millimeter films. I think he got them from Channel 29 in Buffalo. They had been getting rid of their stock of old films, and so he got a bunch of stuff from them and various other places. But we would watch the films on the flatbed and stop frame them and analyze them. Dan Smith was also in our class. Rob Sadler, Steve Schneer, various other guys. Just a bunch of really nice people in that year that I had, who went on to work in animation. The vast majority of them went on to work in animation.
Yeah, and when you were at Sheridan as a student, was it still sort of the hope was you get hired in second year, that you're not around for third year?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because second year was an interesting year for me. The course as it was back then, first year was all the basic principles of animation, and bouncing ball and walk cycle and stuff like that. And I was a keener, in first year. I absolutely adored the program. And I remember it was like the first or second day in the course, and I stayed in the school till late at night. It must have been 1 or 2 o'clock at night. And I was trying to do this walk cycle, which turned out to look absolutely crappy. It was horrible because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just so excited to be in the program. I wanted to animate. Yeah. And I remember Bill Matthews coming in and chewing me out for being there so late. He said, "Go home, get some sleep. You're going to need it."
Yeah.
Don't go too far ahead of yourself. That was what he basically said to me. But so second year was group films is what we did. which was good and bad. Good that, we were working on a project together that we created, and each of us had our own section of the film. So our film that we worked on, there were 5 people in our group, and each of us had an assigned section. It was very much a Roadrunner Coyote cartoon type thing, but it had Leonardo da Vinci and a bird. The bird was constantly pooping on Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa paintings, and he got fed up and tried to chase the bird off. And so he developed all of his flying inventions to try and chase the bird. And then
that's a cool story. Yeah.
It was little interstitial pieces of him building the machine to chase after the bird, but then the machine would always fail in some way. Right. And then this fruit vendor got tied into the story as well, and they ended up chasing the bird in a fruit cart with balloons on it. That was my scene. At the very end of the film was the Leonardo in a fruit cart with the vendor rowing with balloons, chasing a bird who was doing a backstroke.
Do you have this digitized?
No.
Oh,
because it never got finished.
Oh, okay. Well, such is the way with all student films, really. Most of them.
Yeah, most of them in general. But for me in particular, the problem was that I became disenchanted with the program. And so I had made the decision probably in about February of the final second semester to drop out of the course.
Right.
And so I basically just stopped doing any of the assignments. And then on a weird note, somebody had said that Melvan was hiring. And I packed up my portfolio, which oddly enough had 0 work from college.
Right.
It had all my high school drawings in it. Oh, and I took that with me, and one of my fellow students went as well, Bob Azzaro. And we showed up at Melvan for the appointment, and giddily waited in the waiting room for our interview. I was interviewed by Clive Smith, and he looked through my portfolio and seemed to be impressed with it, and he offered me a job on the spot as an in-betweener. So that's basically how I got into the animation industry. It wasn't, it was just sort of, I stumbled into it.
Yeah. So between you and I, there are some parallels I can relate to in your story, particularly with the second year becoming disenchanted with the program and deciding to drop out. Same thing happened with me. Second semester into it, or maybe it was the third, I can't remember, but I was starting to get contract offers, and I just was there's something that happens in all animation colleges. Maybe it's courses in general, but I mean, my experience is, 2 different animation colleges I went to, and the students within a month or 2, they become masters of how the course should be taught, how the instructors should be doing their job. They've got no experience in the industry, and all the time is spent bitching about how the course is not done right. And it creates this weird atmosphere of negativity that I found very toxic. And it paralyzed me. I didn't want to work. I didn't want to sit at my seat because I'm hearing all this. Every instructor is the worst person on the planet, and how dare they critique my blah, blah. And I'm just like, but that's what a director would do. If you're not doing it right, they're going to tell you.
Well, we can get into discussion later on when we start talking about the teaching aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I basically, it wasn't quite that bad. It was not so much the instructors. It was more me. I was frustrated with the fact that I wasn't developing as fast as I thought I could. As a matter of fact, like my life drawing it took a nosedive. Like it was horrible.
Yeah. I can relate to that too.
And I can blame the instructor, but I can also blame myself. But there was this disassembly of what I knew or what I was taught in high school, which from my point of view, looking back on my art, I was very good at life drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this disassembly that took place in first year where it stripped you of everything that you knew or did and replaced it with something that was completely foreign. And I look at my life drawings from college and high school, and there's this huge disparity. It's like there's a person who can't draw, or I'm drawing with my left hand from college, and there's a person who knows how to draw from high school. And so that was part of it that fed into, just this feeling that I wasn't progressing as fast as I could. And so then this opportunity came to me to actually work at a studio. And I just sort of jumped on it and was hired.
Was
And
it
so,
intimidating that first day you show up?
I was incredibly excited when I first found out about it, after Clive told me that I had the job, and then it was the following week that I was to come in on the Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So my indoctrination into animation as a studio artist was extremely intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
I came in and we were working on Take Me Up to the Ball Game, which was a half-hour special. And they were just maybe 3/4 of the way through production. And so I was hired to help out with the in-betweening to get the show finished, among other people. Bob Azzaro was also hired at the same time, the fellow student that I came in with. So I got my first scenes from John Collins, who was one of the lead animators on the show. And he handed me a stack of might have been 10 key drawings, and said, here you go, in between these. And so I'm like, yay! I'm an animator, yay!
Yeah.
So I skipped back to my desk and started plowing through this scene.
That's a fantastic image of you skipping, because you're a big guy, like tall. You're tall, and you seem more like you should have a Rambo knife in your hand than a pencil. So the idea of you skipping back to your desk is awesome.
Well, I was very light back then. I was only about 184 pounds. I was a pencil thin 6'3" kid.
Yeah, love it.
I was only 19 years old when I got hired. I was one of the youngest people ever to be hired at Melvan. And so I'm skipping back to my desk, and I'm jumping right in, and I'm plowing through this scene. And I figure, I'm going to really show them. And I guess there must have been, with 10 keys, there might have been 2 or 3 in-betweens on each one, a favor here or a slow in or a slow out or something like that. So total, there might have been, 30 in-betweens that I did. And I plowed through them within maybe 3 or 4 hours, I guess.
Wow.
And giddily went back to John and handed him the pile and said, I'm all done. And he sort of looked up at me and went, you're done? I went, yeah. And so he takes the first key and puts it down on his pegs, takes the second key, puts it down on his pegs, and takes the primary in between and sets it down over top on his light table. And he starts flipping. And he's flipping away. And then there was a torrent of swearing and cussing that came out of him, calling me every name in the book. What the F do you think you're doing, you friggin' moron? You have no idea. Can't you see this is a halfway in between, and the line's supposed to go look where your line is. It's nowhere near halfway. What were you thinking, you effing moron? Blah 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 blah. Poured out of him. And so the whole time I'm standing beside him, and I'm literally sweating.
Oh, for
drips
sure.
Are coming off of me.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. It was just horrible. And so he went through this whole tirade, and I thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
He took out a red pen and he circled every mistake of everything that I had done wrong. And then he didn't stop with that one in between. He went on to the next major in between and continued on with it. Now, the studio at that time, we were at Queen's Quay in the fish terminal building, is what we called it. We were on the second floor. And the studio, it's much like most studios are today. It was there were rooms that we were in, but the space that we were in was actually a cubicle area that housed maybe 2 people on each. Sorry, the phone just going there.
That's okay.
It housed 2 people. Sorry. Okay, somebody's got it there. Sorry. So each room had about two people in it, but the walls went up maybe 8 feet, and then it was open to the ceiling, which was maybe a 12-foot ceiling, and so anybody around could hear everything that was being said. And he wasn't talking quietly; he was yelling at me.
Yeah.
And so again, he's going through the second in between, doing the same thing, cussing and swearing and circling all the mistakes and everything. And by this point, I'm a puddle on the ground. And I'm trembling and thinking, oh man, I'm going to die. And then he finished off his tirade with, you want to last here? You better go back and fix these up. Otherwise, you're gone.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
So I grabbed them. I did not skip back to my desk. I slithered back to my desk and redid the in-betweens. And it took me 3 or 4, I think it took me 3 days to complete those in-betweens. I took my time on those drawings, and I made sure that I did the right thing. And when I brought them back to him after I had finished them, he did the same thing. Took first key, second key, major in between, started flipping. And I'm just standing there, and I'm shaking.
I bet.
And he's flipping, and he's flipping, he's flipping. And he goes, why the F didn't you do this the first time? He says, okay, here's your next scene. Make sure you do it right. And so that was my indoctrination. First day.
What production?
It was Take Me Up to the Ball Game.
Take Me Up to the Ball Game. Right.
Right. And that was painful, but it taught me an incredible lesson that I will never forget. You know, at first you feel this rage, you know, like, how dare you? I mean, after I had slithered back to my desk in a puddle, you know, you're sitting there and you're sort of, I can't believe he talked to me that way. But then you realize everything that he said was absolutely true. Yeah. And if I want to work to this level that these people are working to, I've got to step it up. Yeah. And so what I did was that following week, along with the scenes that I got, I would go home, and one of the things that we did at the studio is people would collect model sheets of various cartoon characters, and they would photocopy them. And so you get a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a model sheet. Yeah. I grabbed a model sheet that Greg Duffel actually gave it to me. He was in the room. He and I shared a room. He gave me a model sheet of Popeye from 1943. And I took that model sheet and I copied it. I just copied it and copied it, copied it. And I didn't just, it wasn't just a set it to the side and look at it and copy it type thing. I put it on the light table and I traced it. Yeah. And I went over every single last line. And one of the valuable lessons that I kind of taught myself, and this is nothing new, I mean, it's been done for years, is that you think about what the lines mean, what each part of the drawing means, why the line is an S curve, why it's a C curve, why it's in front of this line and not behind the other line, and what it represents and the weight of it. You know, there was, back then we used to deal with line quality, where you would have thick and thin lines as opposed to the wire line that we have now. Yeah. Or vector lining, as you know, Toon Boom will do an automatic vector line for you with thick and thin. Yeah. But we have to do with our pencils, where we would sharpen the pencil and then you'd rub it on a sheet of paper a little bit to get a chiseled edge. Yeah. So that you could rotate the pencil in your finger to get either a thin line, and then you'd rotate it as you drew the line to get a thick line. So that process of going through, you know, copying and replicating the drawing until I got it right down, that process helped me to understand better what line control was. And realizing that, you know, this thing here is a weapon to a certain extent. You can do incredible damage, or you can make some beautiful art with it, depending on how you actually use it. You can create a beautiful drawing, or you can create a horrible drawing, but you are in control of it. It's your hand, it's your brain engaged 100% on the drawing at that time that makes a difference. You can't just, you know, I'm in between, because that's what I did the first one, and I got messed over for it. Yeah. So that was a valuable lesson to me.
Yeah, that sounds so terrifying. to go through something like that. And your peers, did anybody come up to you and go, "Oh, it happens to everybody, man. It's okay."
No, nobody said a word. It was
Really?
like, it's like you just sort of everybody knew. Like looking back on it,
Yeah.
because I had heard other people going through the same thing in subsequent weeks and years.
Mm,
It was like a rite of passage, and
right.
everybody just sort of knew it's going to happen, and this is
Yeah.
the way it is. But
Jeez.
yeah, so that was my indoctrination into animation, and then we went through and finished up taking up to the ball game,
Yeah.
and then we phased into Rock and Roll,
Right.
which was the next production being worked on by
So
Melvan.
this time period is when you start to feel like, okay, now I'm really learning and growing. Not
Yeah,
so much like when you were in school, you're like, I feel like I'm not developing. And
I
you
was
go to
flat.
Nelvana and then you're like, whoa, you're going full speed.
Yeah, yeah. I understand, having taught that every assignment has a purpose to it, and there's a reason behind it, and there's a system of rules and regulations and principles that you're being taught, and you have to master those. But when you're working on a production, it's like you have to bring all that stuff together
Mm-hmm.
and do the job. You're being paid to do the job.
Yeah.
And if you don't do the job, this is one of the other big things that I realized or found immediately. And I've said this to my students over the years, is that in the animation industry, it's a giant machine. And this machine pumps out cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
In one side comes ideas, it goes through the mechanisms of the whole machine, and it pumps out cartoons at the other end that are seen on TV or in the theater. And within the machine, there are a bunch of little wheels, cogs is what I have termed them as being. And those are the people working on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the studio looks at it is if you're a cog, if one cog is not working, if the things on it are stripped,
Mm-hmm.
it's just going to take that cog, pull it out, throw it away, and put a new cog back in again.
Yeah.
And with the way, animation has been over the years, because it's sort of, I got into it during the Renaissance period, is what I would term it as being.
Mm-hmm.
Early 80s is when things sort of kicked off and everything sort of exploded. I mean, Hanna-Barbera had been controlling everything that was going on, previous to that, from the 60s to the
Right.
70s. 70s was sort of a crap period where everything went downhill and looked horrible. But then Melvan sort of started to pick it up a little bit, putting in quality stuff. And that was partially due to the fact that Sheridan was pumping out the students. I mean, not pumping out in the same way that they're doing it now, because we only had 60 students in our year.
Right.
And so out of that 60, you might get, well, that was in first year, coming out of third year, you might have 40. And out of those 40, you might have 30 that are actually viable.
Mm-hmm.
And have a long-lasting career in animation. So the idea of the animation studio just pulling out a cog and throwing it away and putting a new one in, because they've got students who are coming out of the college system every year, you realize, holy cow, I've got to do my job or I'm going to get replaced quite easily.
Yeah.
So that was the other realization that hit me very, very early on. So between the end of, or between the point that I was hired, which was, I believe it was May of 1980, to the end of the year, that was taking up to the ball game, and then we phased into Rock and Roll. So it was during that time period that we ended up on. I'm not saying that I learned everything and was suddenly, kapow, I'm amazing. I was an in-betweener.
Right.
That was my job. I was just an in-betweener. And so I just kicked out the drawings. And my philosophy was, like, having been indoctrinated that way so brutally at the very beginning, it changed my mindset, like I said, to being professional. I think that's the key thing, is I learned what it meant to be professional at that point.
Yeah.
And so I developed a mindset of, I've got to keep getting better and better and better. And I actually remember at one point saying to myself, I want to be the best in-betweener in this studio. And so I set mind to developing my skills specifically in in-betweening, that I could be the guy that they could count on to do good in-betweens.
Right.
That was just my personal philosophy on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were going through animation, did you always have like feature film as the dream level, or were you just happy to be involved in any production?
I was just happy to be in a studio.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
because most people are like, oh, I got to get to Disney feature or Warner Brother, whatever, right?
Well, there's always that pet dream in the back of your head. I want to own a studio.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
I did it, and don't do it, people.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Bad idea. Bad idea.
Yeah.
Be a cog.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
safer.
Yeah, you have those little pet dreams, but I never had this thought in my mind of I want to aspire to, Disney or any. I was just happy that I was in my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
I still lived in Georgetown. I took the GO train, every morning to
Yeah.
Union Station and then walk down to Queens Quay. I was just happy to be employed, and at that time, I think I was only making like $250 a week.
Wow.
So it was like raw base pay type thing.
Yeah.
But I was happy to have a job in animation.
Right.
That was but I was never thinking forward to, well, I want to be working on a feature film someday and I want to be an animator. I was just looking at what was right in front of my plate at that point in time.
Yeah. And when Rock and Roll started up, were you already operating at that level? Or was there a moment where you had to say, okay, I've been in betweening this way, but this is a feature film. I got to double up on my effort.
Yeah, exactly. There was Rock and Roll was a completely different level of production where they sort of had this mandate that they're going for really good stuff, high quality stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody in the studio knew we got to step up our game. And so for me personally, it was that, doubling down on it and just trying to get better. Now, when I started, they had already been in development for quite a while. It was during the time period that Dan Haskett was there and he was doing character development. I remember seeing some of the sheets that he had done for the early ideas of the characters, which were never ever used. And they were sort of rolling over from that cutesy Warner Brothers type of design into the more this type of stuff that you actually see, where Frank Nissen was then taking on the character design lead, and Charlie Bonifacio was following up with secondary characters, and Robin Budd was working on Mock, and so we were seeing the development at that time period of what was coming up, and so we'd play around, we'd shoot out our ideas of what the characters could look like. We were never asked to do it. We were just playing around and trying things on the side.
Yeah.
As we were finishing up, taking up to the ball game, and then phasing into Rock and Roll.
Yeah. Very, very cool. And working on it, do you remember when I was being taught by Harold in Miramichi, he talked about a day when Frank and Ollie showed up at the studio. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. It's odd because they came into the studio. I didn't actually see them come into the studio. I was actually working. I was busy doing in-betweening.
Yeah.
And I knew that they had come into the studio. I knew that they had met with Clive and Patrick and Michael and looked at the film and critiqued it. And then I remember everybody went into the cafeteria and met with them. They talked about their book and did a signing and stuff like that. I didn't go. I didn't go.
Yeah.
I just sort of had my head down, and I knew that they were there. But I've always been intimidated by people who are in the industry that are of that level.
Yeah.
They were gods of animation at that time.
Yeah.
And still are. But I was always intimidated by that, and I could never get the guts up to speak to them face to face.
Yeah.
I've only done it once ever, where I actually got the guts up to talk to someone amazing, and that was Stan Lee, and it was quite a circumstance. But anyways,
well, I hope it worked out for you.
It did. It did. It
Nothing worse than talking to one of your heroes, and first thing you do right out of the bat is put your foot in your mouth.
No, he was a really nice guy, and he spent about half an hour with me.
Wow, very generous.
Yeah, it was amazing until one of his assistants came along and said, Stan, we got to go to a table over here. Come on, let's go. And then he peeled off and said, sorry, I got to go. See you later.
Yeah.
But
So
that was kind
what are some of the productions during your time at Nelvana that you worked on, and what's the one that you would hang your hat on?
well, there was Rock and Roll.
Mhm.
That was the big one.
Yeah.
That lasted about 2.5 years total.
Mhm.
That was a roller coaster ride. Um, I started off as an in-betweener, just sort of doing general in-betweening here and
Yeah.
there and everywhere. And then all of a sudden, Tom Cito grabbed me and said, I want you to be my in-betweener. And I
Wow.
thought, all right, yeah, this is cool. So we were then segregated off. There were, like I said, there were different rooms in two different areas. There were two pods
Mhm.
for the animators. One was the first one that I was in, and then we got moved out to the outer pod with Tom Cito, myself. Tina Seaman was the other in-betweener that was with us. So we were the team there. Roger Allers was one of the animators during that time period, Lion King director.
Mhm.
He was in the room there. Brian Lee, who is a longtime Nelvana personnel. I think he just recently, last couple of years, retired from Nelvana. Let's see who else was there. Linda Roy was in there. Darlie Brewster was there. Dev and Sonia Ramsran were in there. Willie Ashworth was in there. And there was a few other people I can't call to mind exactly who they were, but we were all in that back room. So that was a fun period because we were sort of a group unto ourselves, a little camp.
Yeah.
And so I got called in to work with Tom, and then eventually through the production, actually I should sidetrack here because the production of Rock and Roll was not straightforward. It was not like, you start and we plow through, bang, 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 and ta-da, it's done at the end.
Right.
It was start and stop all the way through.
Right.
There were time periods where we wouldn't have anything to do because production had just stopped on the sections that we were working on. They just decided to swap it out. And
Is
so
is
what
that
happened was,
because they kept rewriting, or
yes,
yeah,
yeah, they
okay.
kept rewriting, and in some cases they redesigned characters completely after principal animation had been done. Like Mylar is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Greg Duffel had Mylar, and he had done a huge amount of animation, and it was beautiful animation. But the problem, I guess, from the studio point of view, was that it was very Warner Brothers type of stuff. And they decided to nix that completely, and they redesigned the character and basically took him off. He was royally ticked about that.
I bet.
I remember that day that they did that to him, and man, he was mad. We were all mad because we loved stuff that he had done.
Yeah.
But there was the rewrites and changing things and swapping things around. Anyways, what would happen is they also had another department within the same studio called Nelvana Animated Commercials, which was NAC, is what we called it. And every so often, we would get called into NAC and say, you've got a commercial. And so, 2 or 3 of us would be working on a television commercial. So one of the first ones that I did was the Puppy Chow commercial. Puppy Chow for a whole year till he's full grown.
This is what happens, folks. But as an animator, you have to keep looping sound, and it just digs into your brain. Yeah.
It's always there. So Willie Ashworth was the animator on that, and I was his assistant on that. And the story behind that one, the famous story behind that one for myself, was that we were working on this commercial, and it's a very cute commercial. It had the voice of the guy who did Winnie the Pooh, Sterling Holloway, did the voice for it. And so he's animating away. I'm assisting and cleaning up, and we're working away on it. And then this was right around Christmas. Actually, it was Christmas Eve, and so December 24th. Patrick comes into the room and says to us, "I need this finished tonight. The commercial has to be finished tonight." And he actually threatened to fire us if we didn't get it done. And so,
how far away from done were you?
We were quite a ways away.
Wow.
So we plowed through, and we didn't end up leaving the studio until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I at that time, Willie didn't have a car, so I drove him home to High Park, and that was our Christmas Eve.
Wow.
It was
So
at the studio.
romantic.
Oh yeah, it was. It really was.
Festive.
Fond memories of that one.
Yeah.
So along the way, we would work on a variety of different cartoons. There was actually a short film that Dave Cox directed called The Fitness Carol. It was about 12 minutes long, and Tom had a section of it, and Willie had a section of it, and Dave had a section. It was a whole mishmash of different people working on it. And so I assisted on that one as well. So during this process of going in-betweening on Rock and Roll and assisting on these commercials and short films for NAC, Tom said, I want you to be my assistant. And so I got notched up to the level of being an assistant animator, which basically means that I was taking his rough drawings and cleaning them up. So putting them into the final line drawing by tracing over them onto a separate sheet of paper, and then assigning out in-betweens to the other in-betweeners and doing some on my own. So yeah, we plowed our way through Rock and Roll. And during that time period, actually, we moved from Queens Quay over to the Lakeshore, the Jarvis Street studio, which is just north of George Brown College, where the campus is there, where they have all the taffy conferences and whatnot, festivals. Yeah, it was an old auto dealership, and it is now an auto dealer. It's a BMW dealership now. But
Full circle.
Yeah. So we moved over to that studio. It took about a month and a half to move everything over. So during that time period, we were all laid off. And production just came to a complete shutdown. And then we started up back there again at the new studio and sort of plowed the way through. I mean, there's all sorts of different stories of things that happened during that time period that are just sort of weird and wacky. But one of the key stories was towards the end of production. Tom and I were working on the final climax scenes of the film, where the beast comes up from the other dimension, the pentagram on the stage. Yeah. And he comes up from that dimension and into the world and starts to threaten Angel. And there's a whole series of scenes. I'm pretty sure I worked on almost every scene that the beast was in, but maybe one or two, because Chuck Gamage was also working on the animation for those scenes too. But the one scene that I recall vividly was the final scene where Angel and Omar are standing on the stage and they're singing, and it's Angel's voice that actually causes the creature to go back to the other dimension. So Tom had animated the scene of the beast in its original, like, formed version, melting and dissolving into this big pile of slush and swirling and being a tornado vortex type thing back down into the other dimension. And so he had animated on this scene, and his drawings for this scene were incredibly rough. He was kind enough to do the key animation in pencil crayon so that everything was color coded, so that if there was lava or slime coming off of them, or bubbles, or the dead babies that are infamous in that scene.
It's a family film, people.
He would color code them all with different colored pencils. So that was amazing. Yeah. But as he went through the scene, he got drunk, basically. He was drinking a lot of beer and basically got drunk to the point where, as the scene progressed in the keys, they get sloppier and sloppier and sloppier. And so when I got the scene, I'm going through it and I'm seeing these beautiful drawings at the very beginning. Yeah. And then it sort of degenerates down into this mess, while the animation is supposed to be like this slurry of guts and stuff all over the place. His drawings did degenerate quite severely. And I remember about halfway through the scene, there were stick-it notes starting to pop up on the drawing saying, this is what this is, and this is what that is. And then towards 3/4 of the way, there, you can tell that he's drunk because his writing gets more slurred as well.
Yeah.
He's like, "I'm really sorry about this, Brian. I hope you can figure out what it is that I'm drawing." And then the very final stick-it note on the last one was, "I'm so sorry."
That's so awesome.
And then he actually said, "I'm going to LA to work at the studios down there. If you ever need a job,
Yeah.
just let me know."
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
And he basically just disappeared.
Yeah.
I didn't say goodbye to him. He didn't say he was leaving. He had just left
Yeah.
and gone to LA. And so that's my funny story of the end of Rock and Roll. But I actually have another one for the very, very end of Rock and Roll.
Great.
So I got through cleaning up all the scenes and everything, and then there was the big wrap-up party, the infamous wrap-up party for Rock and Roll. And again, this happened to coincide just around Christmas time, just before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the cafeteria, and their music is playing, and everybody's drinking and socializing and everything, and having a great time. And yeah, this is a great movie, and blah blah blah. And we had seen various versions of the film throughout, but we had actually seen the final version of it. So we didn't know what the end result. I didn't know what the end result looked like, but everybody was just happy that it was done, and cheering each other up and everything. And Patrick goes up, or no, it was Clive that went up first, and he grabs the microphone and he thanks everybody for their hard work and dedication on the film, and says, "You've all done such an amazing job." And then Michael comes up and he gives his congratulations, and then Patrick comes up and says, "Oh yeah, you guys did a great job, and we're so thankful that you worked on this, and we really appreciate everything you've done on the production. And by the way, you're all laid off. We have nothing coming up."
Oh, jeez.
And it was like a mic drop, and we were all like,
"Wow, wow."
"What?"
Was that the motivating factor for the day that Harold went outside and punched a police officer?
I think I don't remember exactly. No, I think that was. I don't know when that was.
Yeah,
I know it happened. Several things happened with Harold throughout the production where he just sort of
I believe it.
he lost here, there, and everywhere. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people were very frustrated, and yeah, there were a lot of different emotions on that production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you said it had this stop and go momentum to it, so that would be incredibly, like, just when you're starting to get into your groove and you hit one of those stop points, like that would be aggravating.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky because we had the knack stuff to bounce off on.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so disruptive, but yeah, it was a wild roller coaster.
Yeah.
Very wild roller coaster. And of course there were time periods in the entire production when they were saying, "We don't have any money." Like the studio was saying, "We've run out of money." And they would give out paychecks and they'd say, "Don't cash this check until next Monday," or something like that.
Yeah.
And I can recall lots of times, like as soon as we got our checks, you would run to the bank immediately and cash that check.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And so I would run up Jarvis Street to the Commerce Bank that was on the corner of King and Jarvis, and I would cash my check immediately on payday just to make sure that it went into the account. But yeah, there were lots of times when they said, "Don't cash the check, wait." And yeah, so it was frustrating, thrilling, exciting. Yeah, it was an interesting production. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I developed my skills an awful lot. I can remember as an assistant, saying to myself, okay, like setting out a precept of rules that these are the things that an assistant animator has to do and has to know, and you have to become proficient in this, and how to deal with in-betweeners and how to deal with revisions. And, I was very analytical about the way I approached my work. I even wrote out schedules of how I could improve my time, and how much time I should spend on an individual drawing, and trying to maximize my time. I was very mindful of that during that time period. So we got laid off at the end of Rock and Roll, which again, just before Christmas, was incredibly demoralizing. And so I went home and I didn't know what I was going to do because basically we were out of a job with no guarantee. There was no offer of, yeah, we're going to get something else going.
Yeah.
So I went home, had Christmas, and tried to figure out what the heck am I going to do with the rest of my life. And it was January, either the 2nd or 3rd. I can't remember the exact date. January 2nd or 3rd. I got a phone call from Dale Cox, who was the production manager. And she said, "Hi, Brian, how are you doing?" I said, "I'm okay." She said, "Yeah, we have a position available if you're interested on the next production that we're working on. Would you like to come down to the studio?" And I said, "Sure." Didn't ask what it was or anything like that. And so I said, "Okay, I'll be there on Monday morning." So hung up the phone and drove down Monday morning. She met me at the front door and said, "Hi, Brian, come on in." We walked to the back of the studio, all the way to the very back of the studio. And there was a desk sitting right by the emergency exit.
So ominous having to walk.
and she said, here's the desk. Sit down here. Just hang up your coat over there. There's a little coat rack, like a single standing coat rack. Hung out my coat and I sat down on the desk and sitting there in my swivel chair looking around going, "Yeah, I remember this place. Yeah. My room used to be over there." And yeah. And then maybe waiting 5-10 minutes. And then Pete Sauter walks up, who was one of the writers. And he plunks down these scripts, 2 or 3 scripts. And he says, "Take a look through these and come up with the main character, or not the main characters. The main characters are all pre-designed, but I want you to come up with all the secondary characters in the show. So just read through the script and make a list and then start designing the characters." And I went, "Oh, wow. I'm a character designer." I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I picked up the first script and it was Down on the Farm, Inspector Gadget. And so I open it up and start flipping through and reading the script. And okay, it's Inspector Gadget. He's got these gadgets and he's okay. Yeah. So then I made this list. There were these agents, mad agents that were in the show. So I had a sheet of paper and I started writing a mad agent number 1, mad agent number 2, this person, that person, a sheep, a cow, a chicken, and et cetera, et cetera. And then a few minutes later, this other guy comes over who I'd never seen before, curly hair, glasses, Italian. Bruno Bianchi was his name. He comes over and he says, "You're the new character designer, eh?" But he does it in an Italian accent. I'm not going to do the Italian accent. He says, "You're the new designer." I go, "I guess so. Yeah. He says, "Okay, well, we're working on this Inspector Gadget show, and I'm the main designer. I'm the guy that came up with all the characters and everything." So he says, "Here are some of my sketches that I've done." And he handed me the sheet, and it was this bizarre sheet of all these weird drawings. A couple of drawings one was of Inspector Gadget, one was of Penny, one was of a sumo wrestler. And Penny, there was a drawing of Penny, and there was another drawing of Penny, but she had a syringe sticking out of her arm, and she looked like she was all doped up. And then he handed me a card that probably would have been about that size, this tiny little card. And it had a whole series. It was just covered in faces, anime character faces. And they were just these teeny tiny little heads all over this little card. And he said, "This is the design style that we're going for." I went, "Okay."
So you need a magnifying glass to check it out.
Well, at that point, I didn't need glasses to see close up. So I was looking at it going, okay, yeah, okay, all right. So then he brought me over another series of model pack sheets of all the main characters, Gadget, Quimby, Brain, Penny, and said, "Okay, so now you need to come up with some mad agents for this show." So I just started scribbling out ideas, which were horrible drawings, and not anywhere near what the style was supposed to be. But I started to zone in on what the style was. So then I developed the first few mad agents for that show, did up character rotations of them. They were all naked to start off with, and then I put the mad agent suit on them. And then we would package those up. I would photocopy them down because I did them all on 11 by 17 sheets of paper. Like
Mhm.
actually, what I would do is I would do the individual drawings of the character on either 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17, and then you would then photocopy it, but reduce it down to the proper size, and then I would go back over top of it and clean it up.
Mhm.
And I usually, at that point, I had started to develop this process where my cleanups, I did this for myself, not for any professional reason, but I did my cleanups with a Pilot fineliner marker. And the reason I did it with a Pilot fineliner marker was because I knew that once I put the line down, it was
Mhm.
there, it was
Yeah.
solid. And I learned to control my line better that way, that I would
Yeah.
take care and precision, knowing that every line counted. And
Yeah.
so rather than doing it in pencil and erasing mistakes, I would just go over it in the marker. And it also made for a better photocopy as well.
Y- Right. Now, it's funny you mention that because that's one of the things I remember about learning under you was when you were nice enough from time to time to sit down and put a piece of paper over one of our drawings and show how we could think about things differently to get a better design or a better pose, you know. And I remember watching you draw because I love those moments, right? If I can watch somebody do it. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, when I learned under Harold, he was very fast and, super quick, gestural, rough. And
Right.
I fell in love with that process because I'm like, okay, that might be something I can do. And then when you would draw, you were still rough and loose, but there was this control there, like your hand wasn't flying away from you. You were
Right.
it was very deliberate, and I remember thinking I could never draw like that, because I've got very shaky hands, and just recently I found out the reason why is because I have essential tremors. I've had them all my life, so the real
Right.
rough way of drawing, suits me better. But you were very. I remember thinking, wow, he can draw a circle so good right off the bat, like just a one line, here's your skull. And I'm like, that I would have to draw 100 lines to get that shape. So
Yeah. Well,
that makes sense. You're saying you went to ink, which is a terrifying idea to me for your cleanup line. That takes skill.
well, I worked out all my problems and all the issues of what the character's shape and volumes and proportions and everything were in rough. So
Yeah.
my rough drawings were ugly roughs. Like there would be a drawing on top of a drawing on top of a drawing type thing. And then I'd take another sheet of paper and go over top of that and rough out another one to the
Mm-hmm.
point where it was then solid. So all I then had to do was just trace it
Mm-hmm.
basically, but with the control. Again, that was a time saving device
Mm-hmm.
because I found that with pencil, I would do the feathering technique where you draw like this. And
Yeah.
so you're drawing each line like 20 times as opposed to with a marker, you go and you're done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it saved time from that point of view.
Mm.
So yeah, that was one of the things that I sort of developed for myself. And it was also out of necessity a little bit later on as well, because during the time that I was working on Inspector Gadget, uh, I learned the principle of it never rains, but it pours,
Right.
or it's
Yeah.
either feast or famine.
Yeah.
Because when I was working on Rock and Rule, it was basically what was in front of my plate at Melvana. That's what I did, and that
Mm-hmm.
occupied the majority of my time. And when I went home and didn't do anything. However, with on Inspector Gadget, I began to get this flood of job offers, uh, magazine stuff like for you know Owl magazine or this magazine or that magazine, and
Yeah.
part of it had to do with the fact that I realized after being laid off from Rock and Rule that my job was not secure. It's never secure.
Yeah.
That you always have to be looking like two steps ahead
Mm-hmm.
as to what's going to come, because this is one of the things that I've often said to students is that no job is going to last you for the rest of your life. Like it's not like you're an insurance salesman where you work for an insurance company and you can start at age 20 and end at age 65 and retire with
Right.
pension.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
animation.
Yeah.
Animation is a contract because the show is one season long, and that season is going to take 6 months to put it into production, and that's your slot. That's all you work for.
Yeah.
And once the character designs for Inspector Gadget are done, we don't need you anymore. Goodbye. Back to the
Right.
cog machine thing.
Yeah.
And so Melvan is not going to put me on retainer and pay my salary, for the rest of my life on the off chance that they might need another character design for the next. No, they work to production.
Right.
Right. So I began to look around for auxiliary work. So I began to pick up stuff on the side. And one of the jobs that I had was for a magazine. And I remember the very first job that I did for them was illustrating this one-page comic. And I did it all in rough and blue pencil, and then cleaned it up using a pencil.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it into them and gave it to them. They took it, and back then it was like photostat.
Mm-hmm.
You would have a big giant camera that you took the picture of it, and then that would create a negative, and that negative would then be used to create the positive, and that would be used to create plates for printing.
Right.
Pre-digital age.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back when we were working with stone. So they did the photostat of the pencil drawing, but all the lines dropped out. All the grayscale lines dropped out. And I had to redo the entire page, but I had to use marker in order to pen the lines in. So that was my indoctrination into pen and cleaning up. So, but that's just a side story of that process. So Inspector Gadget was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was hard work, a lot of hard work. The contract was for 6 months. So I started in January, I finished in June, and we did 64 shows over that 6-month period. So we were doing a show every 2.5 days, or I was doing a show every 2.5 days. So they also had storyboard artists who were relying on me to create the character designs for the show. So I was under the gun both ways. I had my 2.5 day schedule, and I had the storyboard artists who were clamoring for designs.
Yeah.
So there might be 3 or 4 storyboard artists working on 3 or 4 shows, and I had to get the designs out to them as quickly as possible.
Right.
So I was lucky that in a few cases, some people would come to me with some conceptual designs that they had done, thinking, oh, this is what the character could look like for this show.
Mm-hmm.
They would then do the storyboards using their concept designs, and I would base my design on their concept and make it as close to possible, tweak it to get to the design, but then they would use it. So each show had approximately, well, on average, the number I usually throw out is about 10 characters per show. Wow. So over a 2.5 day period, I had to come up with 10 character designs and model sheets. Now the model sheets weren't full blown. They were a 3/4 front view, full body standing, a side view, and a 3/4 rear view. And you might have a couple of expression poses on it.
So you got good at character rotation real quick.
Real quick. Yeah. And again, you develop these little tricks and ways of doing things, like the 3/4 front view and the 3/4 back view have the exact same silhouette. So all you have to do is just trace it off, but just draw the back of the character instead. So it became easy from that point of view. I didn't have to start from scratch drawing the character in that position. I would just flip the drawing over and just draw the back of the character in the silhouette. And that made it consistent as well. So it wasn't just human characters that I had to do. Like there was always mad agents. So there was a standard slew of, I can't remember how mad. Oh, actually I do have, I didn't plan to do this, but I just happen to have. There's
oh wow, cool.
So that's my stock size relationship sheet for
the original copy and paste.
Yes, it is actually the original copy and paste one.
Yeah.
So you get Gadget over here, and then all the mad agents in order of their height.
Right.
So there's the 7 of them that are there that we used as the stock agents, and then usually every episode had a special guest mad agent that Claw would say, okay, you're the one that's going to go out and destroy Gadget in some way. But then he had his henchmen that would be in the background doing the dirty work. And then there were the shows where Penny had some buddy from another country or something that would show up. So I'd do the design for that. And then there were incidental background characters that would show up. So I'd do all the primary ones of those. And if Brain was ever in a costume, I had to do the Brain costumes. if Quimby was ever in disguise, I had to do the disguise for Quimby.
Yeah.
Both pre showing himself, and then being blown up,
Yeah.
because he always got blown up by the secret message.
Yeah.
So there was always, and then animals. I always had to do the animals as well. So there might have been 1 or 2 animals every episode. And then the odd.
Did you ever become aware of okay, so when the show was airing in the schools, I was I'm gonna say grade 3, grade 4, somewhere around there when the show was airing. Maybe a little bit older. I mean, it aired for years, like in reruns and stuff, so it's hard to remember. But I remember in the school, the rumor was there was one episode where Dr. Claus showed his face.
Yeah.
And we would all watch the show to see if it was that one episode, and never saw it. Was there, in fact, one episode, or just
Not that I know of. Not in the original series that I worked on.
Yeah.
Now in the series, there might have been. I know there was a toy that was made that had the claw, but it was an awful design.
Yeah.
But that anytime I do like talks with people or introduce myself and say I worked on Gadget, that's the question that is most often asked.
Yeah.
Is what
Well,
did the claw?
it was such a rampant rumor on the school playground, and some kids be like, "I saw it. You didn't see it? I saw it." And you're like, "Oh, Timmy saw it. Why didn't I see it?" You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's the most often asked question, and the answer is no. He was never shown in any of the shows that I worked on.
Yeah.
And even as a joke, we never ever did a drawing of, hey, this is what the claw looks like. Because again, my schedule was so tight, and I was just so inundated with work, because I was, at the time I was working on Gadget. I was doing magazine illustrations every month. Like I had 2 magazines that I was working on. So, each magazine had maybe 15 to 30 drawings that I would have to do during that time period.
Wow.
I was also doing editorial cartoons for the Georgetown Herald newspaper once a week. And I actually worked for an advertising agency at the same time in Toronto, doing Kellogg's cereal box illustrations for the back of the cereal boxes.
Wow.
And any giveaways that they used to throw into the box as well.
Yeah.
Like they used to rub down transfer things, the Quick Rabbit or something. Well, Nestle's Quick was another client that we had, where we would do these little pages that were about this big that folded in half.
Mhm.
And then inside they would have a little rub down transfer. So it would have a background scene on the paper, and then you could rub down all the different characters on the background to make your own scene.
This is like Inception for me, because like as a kid, reading the back of the cereal box while I ate the cereal was like, it was the equivalent to the iPad today.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you were influencing me way way long ago.
Yeah. Subliminally.
Yeah. No, that's man, the hustle on you. Whoa.
Well, and that was because it was feast or famine.
Yeah.
And Gadget was a step up from being an in-betweener and assistant. I did get a pay raise for being an assistant on Rock and Roll, but Gadget, I only got $500 a week on Gadget.
Wow.
And they were working my butt off, and I needed to supplement it. So I would look for these odd jobs here, there, and everywhere. So I was doing all that stuff all at the same time. So I learned to economize and create a pattern for the way I did things, on a schedule. So it really locked me down quite a bit in a good way, to help train me. And again, it was training because I had never done character design before. It was like I said at the beginning of the story, I just walked in. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never done character design before. But the reason I found out later, the reason I got the job was that while I was working on Rock and Roll, everybody would have their desk area, and on the walls around you, you would pin up influential drawings or posters or whatever turned you on,
Yeah.
And so I would have this stuff pinned up, and what I would do is I would take my own drawings and pin them up. So I would do, and actually this goes back to when I was in kindergarten watching Roger Ramjet. I was reintroduced to Roger Ramjet again at the end of college, and throughout Rock and Roll, the 2.5 years on Rock and Roll, they began doing replays or reruns of it.
Wow.
And I had bought myself a Betamax machine. This old dinosaur was a huge machine with a top loader. And I would tape all the episodes and then watch them back. And I did that with any animation that was on TV. I would tape it and then watch it and then analyze it.
Yeah.
To sort of feed my brain with information about this is what it's like. So actually Gadget, the design of Gadget was influenced by Inspector Gadget. I tried to bring some of that element into it, which also infiltrated all my other stuff. But getting back to how I got the job on Gadget, towards the end of Rock and Roll, I found out about this Canadian arts funding thing through the government, where you could apply to, get money for free on a grant. And so I applied for one and to do a short film, and I decided I was going to do a Sherlock Holmes cartoon because at that point I fell in love with the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films from the 1930s and 40s, and so I began doing caricatures of Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, and developed it into a series of characters with Dr. Watson and Professor Moriarty and Mrs. Hudson and et cetera, et cetera. And then I wrote this story, and then I presented it to the Arts Council, got a grant for $15,000, and began working on this while I was working on the role. Never got it completed. It's always one of those projects that's on the side that I revisit. But the problem back then was, I know I'm skipping around here, but the problem back then was, again, you have to remember, this is 1982. And so everything was 16 millimeter film. Betamax had just been introduced, so videotape had just been introduced. When I was in high school, they used reel-to-reel videos. And actually, on Rock and Roll, we had a pencil test machine that was video, but it was a reel-to-reel video. There weren't cassettes at that point yet. So this takes you back technology-wise in time, that in order to produce a film, you had to have access to a 16 millimeter camera on a Bolt stand or an Oxbury stand.
Right.
They just weren't readily available. So I never got the film done. But anyways, I had the character designs from the Sherlock Holmes film pinned up to my wall. And I found out later on that late at night, after everybody had vacated the studio, Patrick would walk through the studio and go through everybody's desk. He would just sort of pick through and look at stuff here, there. And I had my drawings up and I found this out after the fact.
It's a little bit creepy.
Well, not really, because I mean, he owns a studio. He owns everything in there. It's his stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, but just so long as he didn't have anything,
Well, that's the thing, right? No anti-management caricatures lying around.
Exactly. So I had my Sherlock Holmes designs pinned up on the wall, and I guess he had seen them and said, knowing that before he did the mic drop thing, we had no productions after the fact, that they were going to be doing Inspector Gadget, because it was just before Christmas, and then January they started working on it.
Right.
They knew. They just didn't say anything to anybody.
Right.
But so he had seen my designs, and that was why he had Dale phone me up for the character design position, because he liked those designs and thought it would fit well with Gadget.
Wow.
So
talk about serendipity, eh? Like just a chance.
Well, you know what? Again, I'm going to flip forward in time here to the present, and looking back on my entire career, it's all been, seriously, it's all been right place, right time.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's not so much, part of it is who you know and how well you've worked with the person and et cetera. That doesn't really work into it completely. It truly is right place, right time. Because recently, like with COVID, jobs are very sparse. I mean, there are lots of job openings out there, but and this is me opening up to whoever's watching this now.
Yeah.
I have not worked for about 1.5 years now.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything, but I have a log sheet here somewhere. I'm not going to pull it out. I know it's beside me on my desk here. I have a log sheet of the number of jobs that I've applied for over the last 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And the number is in the 60s.
Yeah.
60 jobs that I've applied to through Indeed or, whatever, Glassdoor. And I've done this throughout my entire career, where you try and force a job and try and drive yourself to a job, and it just never really works.
Yeah.
It's always right place, right time.
Yeah.
Even to the
Now,
point where
have you started down the road on a job, and within very early into the process, it just feels completely wrong, and you're like, I can't, I need to not be doing this.
no,
No.
I've never really been in that situation because I've been lucky enough that when the right place and the right time comes along,
Mm-hmm.
it's usually the right job as well. When I say usually, I mean it has always been the right job.
Yeah.
I've only ever turned down a job maybe 3 times that I can
Mm-hmm.
think of off the top of my head, where I've just said no, I'm not going to do that, either because the pay was so low,
Mm-hmm.
or I knew the project just wasn't going to be. It wouldn't suit me.
Mm-hmm.
3 times I've turned down a job. Anything else I've always taken on, and
Yeah.
I've always had the attitude that regardless of what it is, I'll give it my best to try and make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you talking to other people, on your podcast about their careers, and I would venture to say that uh, I think the safe number would be 75% of the stuff that I have worked on
Mm-hmm.
has never seen the light of day.
I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear you say that, because that's been my career. I mean, my career, I've been the biggest help to independent producers around the world who never showed their project to anybody.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I get lots. I mean, I won't get into the details on it because it's kind of a bitter story. But I worked on a project for about 5 years, part time,
mm-hmm.
With the verbal guarantee, the money's coming, the money's coming,
Yeah.
the money's coming.
Yeah.
And I worked on it because I believed in the project. I loved the project. It was fun to work on because I was given carte blanche.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically, here's the audio track, have fun.
Yeah.
And do whatever you want. You're the designer, you're the animator, you're the producer, director, you're everything. Just have fun. And I did. I did about 7 of the clips and had fun with them, but the money just never ever came. And at this point, I mean, it's in limbo. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day,
Mm-hmm.
other than what I've shown, online.
Yeah.
Even that, most of that I've stripped off because of the conflict that we've had over money just recently.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in general, like there are tons of projects that I've started on that you get into development on, and you work your brains out on it, and it just fizzles out.
Yeah.
They can't get somebody to buy it, or they can't get somebody to distribute it, or it just never reaches second base.
And I've been on both sides of that fence as somebody who believed that they could find the money and had artists working for them. And that didn't work out. And I've been the artist who agreed to go along for the ride on the promise, and it didn't work out. And it's just so common in animation as a whole. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a common thread. But I mean, it's understandable because you've got a bazillion and one people out there who have great ideas for great shows that just, I've got 3 or 4 ideas for shows that I have to pitch, and just pitching is a very, and I've heard you say the same thing. Pitching is a very interesting animal because you'll pitch to one studio and they'll go, yeah, that's a really interesting idea, but we really like it if you took that idea that you have that's for 12 to 18-year-old kids, and if you knocked it down to like preschool, that would make it perfect. But then you just the entire idea. Then you go to another studio and they go, yeah, that's really cool, but we really like you to notch it up so that it's an R-rated cartoon.
Yeah.
It's never right. Or you switch it around and you change it to that other zone, and they go, yeah, we're not doing those cartoons anymore. We're not making those like that. We're now in this age range.
Yeah, and it's changing so much quicker now. Streaming has degraded people's attention spans to almost nothing. And most streamers have it clocked to the second when people will tune out on an average basis.
Yes.
even if they're a big fan of something. And
Yep.
so the idea, I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. So I follow a lot of different comedians, and they say now when they do a special, they reverse the order of their jokes. They take all the big closer, the stand-up ovation ones, put them at the beginning because people are out within 10 to 20 minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, that's true. It was the last job that I worked on was for Snapchat.
hmm,
I was a storyboard supervisor for a little production that they did, which was quite ingenious, actually. I don't know how many people out there actually got a chance to see it. It was on Snapchat. For those of you that don't know, with Snap, you can go on. Bitmoji is actually the company that we dealt with specifically.
mhm.
But when you go into Snap, you can create an avatar for yourself where you can select the different features. It's create your own cartoon character of
Okay.
yourself. So you select your head shape out of 20 different head shapes, and your eyes, if they're brown or blue or slanted or straight or round or whatever,
Yeah.
different types of noses. So it's like this flip book of different faces that ultimately comes up with your avatar that looks like you. So you would have this and you would chat with your friends using your avatar. And what they had previous to this production that I worked on was called bit strips, where every day you would be sent out a comic strip, just like a 4-panel comic strip
Mhm.
of you and your best friend that you last spoke to would be in a cartoon together. So they
Wow.
they had this algorithm set up where it was like a generic A character and a generic B character in a situation.
Mhm.
And whenever you went into it with your app, it would take your primary character and put you in the A character and your best friend that you last chatted with in the B character. So
That's
everybody in the
cool.
world would have their own character in this strip for that day.
Right.
Nobody would have the same characters. It would always
Right.
be you and your friend. So they took that to the next logical step was to make it animated. And so what we did was we had these little short cartoons that were on average 4 minutes to 5 minutes long, which they determined that was the attention span of the target audience that we were going for.
Right.
And they had a set script of story where they had the primary character, which is you, your best friend, and then a couple of other secondary characters within it. And it was sort of, it played out an awful lot like Robot Chicken, where it's
Okay. Yep.
interstitial pieces where it'd be like, and they actually had changing of the channel would go, and then you would flip to another channel.
Right.
Um, and so each one was like a little standalone clip of maybe 10 seconds long, 20 seconds long, 2 minutes long. They usually divided it up so that they had one primary overarching story that went through the whole thing that was broken up by little commercials here and there or various
Yeah.
other things. And so I was the storyboard supervisor for that. And this just gets to the point of it being for 4 minutes. That was the attention span that people had, but
Yeah.
it turned out really well. And I was surprised they didn't pick it up for another loop. We did 10 shows on it overall, and it turned out really nice. I was very happy with the end product.
That's really neat. How surprised are you at how technology has impacted 2D animation? Because if you think back to like 98, 2000, we're just sort of getting into that phase of Flash and Wacom tablets, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think at that time anybody had the foresight of how far it would go today. Like now you have 2D rigs that behave like 3D characters.
Yep. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I hate animating with those. Oh, I hate it.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's funny when we look at this in the context of the history of animation overall.
Yeah.
I remember when I first got into animation, and again, this was 1980. My dad he didn't really support my choice of getting into animation. He was his job that he had had since he was 20 was working for a company called CIL Plastics, which had a company. Their production plant was based in Brampton, and he was a salesperson, and he would sell garbage bags basically.
Hmm.
And it expanded out to other stuff like the clear bags that you put your fruit and vegetables in at
Yeah.
stores. those were produced by CIL. And it later evolved into silage bags that you see now when you're driving in the country and you see the bales of hay, which are now these big round
Yeah, the
cylinder
marshmallows.
marshmallows. Well, they
Yeah.
are stored in silage bags, which are just giant plastic bags that you stuff. So you see these big white wieners
Yeah. Yeah.
of hay. So that was the company that he worked for. So the reason I bring this up is that he had a stable job for his entire life.
Yeah.
From 20 till the day he retired at 65, that was his job.
Yeah.
And it was exciting because he ended up going around the world to China, to South America, is selling these bags.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one point, it was actually right after Inspector Gadget, because once Gadget had ended, I was fried. Like I had gotten to, I believe it was show 60. And I remember walking in one day and everything just turned off. I had a script in my hand and I went to Dale and I said, I can't do this anymore. I haven't got anything left. It's all gone. Like I can't come up with another character. And luckily they had brought in Drew Edwards, who I believe had just finished college, came in and he picked up for the last 6 shows or the last 4 shows, the designs on it. And I left. I walked out of the studio. I quit.
Wow. Yeah.
And my dad pulled me aside after 2 weeks of, I was living at home at the time. He pulled me aside and said, "Son, what are you going to do with your life?"
Oh,
Not
yeah.
exactly like that, but it was one of those discussions.
Yeah.
And I said, "Dad, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm just totally burnt. I don't know what I'm going to do." And he said, "Put your clothes on." I may have been sitting in the kitchen eating Cheerios in my underwear. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said,
wow.
Come with me. And so we got in the car. He drove me down to the factory on Kennedy Road in Brampton where they made the bags. And he took me inside and he showed me what is called an extruding machine, that they actually make the bags on this extruding machine. Quite impressive. It was in a big, giant, round, cylindrical room that almost looked like the engine from the Star Trek Enterprise, and it would blow bags.
Yeah.
It would just blow bags and then seal them together and then roll them up onto this thing. So the place was humming and noise was everywhere and all that stuff. And he was showing me around the entire plant, and he says, "I can get you a job here tomorrow, and you will have a secure job for the rest of your life. You'll have a pension, but you won't be able to draw anymore. Is this what you want your life to be?" And I was really kind of put back by the straightforwardness of this conversation that we had. And I remember thinking to myself and saying to him, I can't do that. I have to draw. I have to draw.
Yeah.
And he said, "I know you do." And he said, "You need to go out and just put your nose down and start to look for jobs, and you be the artist that you are."
What that is such a loving thing.
Yeah,
for a parent to do.
It was incredible. And it was the turning point in my life. It was after Gadget, second job that I had ever had with Melvan. And it changed my life. And it made me realize that this is what I have to focus on. And I didn't look back from that point on. I did have little sections where, between jobs, I delivered pizza. Yeah. Here I'm the designer of the Inspector Gadget show, and I'm delivering your pizza.
Yeah. Again, I'm relieved to hear this because I've gone from productions to working in call centers. So I know that peak and valley kind of pattern.
Exactly.
It's nice to know I wasn't the only one that went that far down because it happens.
Now, we've diverged off of your original point, which was the technology thing.
Yes. Thank you.
The reason I brought up my dad was because early on when we were working on Rock and Roll actually used some of the first computer animation in a feature film with those little icon things that were his computer assistants and accountant and whatnot. And there were various other effects that were done by computer. But I remember there was an article in the Toronto Star about computers being used in film and animation and how it was going to take over the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad saying to me, well, why, this was pre Gadget,
Yeah.
before the talk that I had with him. He was not big on me being in animation. He said, why are you doing this when 10 years from now, computers are going to be doing it all for you? You won't have a job. And I remember laughing at him saying, well, you're always going to need someone who has the artistic bent to it to make it happen.
Yeah.
It cannot do anything by itself. And so even as we go through time, as the computer began to develop, I remember that entire period. I remember at Sheridan, just after I had started teaching there, it was 1988, going in, and they had a computer animation program just starting up at that point in time. And I remember going in to speak to the coordinator of the program. His name has just flit out of my head for a second here. And asking him, why is it that Photoshop, because Photoshop had just been developed and put online, and everybody had those little square Macintosh.
Yeah.
The very first model of Macintosh, they had Photoshop on it because they were teaching it in an illustration program. Yeah. I said to the coordinator of the computer animation program, I said, why can't Photoshop develop a program where you can scan a drawing in and then you can isolate an area of the drawing and flood fill it? Why can't they do it? And this was before it actually could be done. And then, of course, subsequent years, and now it's normal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then you see the progression as time goes along, where the computer takes over what was done on film, to the point now where, sitting in front of me, I'm talking to you online on my computer, and off to my right here is my Wacom tablet. This is my animation studio. I have my desktop computer, and I've got my Wacom, and all the animation that I want to do can be done through the programs right here. Now, having talked about Toon Boom, it's a great program. I think it's amazing the steps that they've taken forward with it. I don't want to slag them, because I think what they're doing is developmentally necessary. And it's not their fault that it's not being utilized properly, because they are the developers who are creating a software program, so that, it's like you can build a car, but what the person does with that car is their fault. It's not the people who built it. It's not their fault they got into a car accident. So Toon Boom is doing some amazing stuff. So is Maya and Autodesk and Adobe. With Photoshop. Photoshop has an animation set up in it, and I do my animation in Photoshop, which is amazing. So I think all that stuff is incredible. I think the issue is the people who are using it they're having their hands tied. And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the animation that's done today, is that they've got this great program, but they're not being allowed to use it properly. Or they're using it in a lazy way. At least I know this is what happened at the very beginning, because I was still teaching at the time. Like, I stopped teaching in 2015, or sorry, 2018. People were still letting the program do what the artist should have done. And this was part of my pet peeve with computer animation, is that there are the fundamental principles of animation that Frank and Ollie laid out for us in The Illusion of Life, that as classical animators we all adhere to: slow in, slow out, anticipation, action, reaction, overlapping action, settle, all those things that we hold dear to our hearts as classical animators. People who use the computer now are allowing the computer to do those things, or defaulting to let the computer do it. So the computer doesn't understand, unless you tell the computer that when you set a key here and you set a key here, all it understands is how many frames are there in between. And then it will mathematically subdivide that into equal portions, so that if you say halfway, it'll give you a halfway. If you say add another in between here, it'll go halfway, and then halfway. So you've got eighths, quarters, sixteenths, etc. But it will do it mathematically throughout the whole thing, right? So that means that there is no such thing as a slow in or slow out to the computer program.
Mm-hmm.
It simply makes a mechanical move.
Right.
And so unless you go in and do it yourself and say, no, I want this drawing to be here and I want this drawing to be here, and you're slowing in and then slowing out on the back end of the movement,
Mm-hmm.
the computer doesn't recognize it. So it's you, the artist, that has to do it.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of animation that is defaulting to let the computer do it, and they're just being lazy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's where I see the problem with animation in general today. That and the design.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Oh my God. The design is just, everybody's going to this weird thing and it's driving me nuts. Like there's certain, like the Thundercats redesign, or, there's this weird cutesy anime thing that people are defaulting to for almost everything. And it's just driving me nuts.
It's Muppet Babies. Taking adult characters and turning them into babies.
Yeah.
So that you can feed into that demographic of people. I'm surprised that they haven't gone the opposite route and made them really old.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. But
yeah, so the design is the other issue that I have a problem with, is that whether it's the studio that's dictating it, or whether it's the lead designer on a production, or whether it's the people who are creating the idea and saying, yeah, I really like this design style, I want you to stick with it. And so there are trends that are cropping up. Everybody wants this design style, and all the shows look like that design style.
Yeah.
And so you get this sameness across the spectrum of all the different shows that are being out.
Yeah.
And you marry that with the problem of uninventive writers that don't know how to write. They have a formula that has worked on other shows that might not be necessarily appropriate, that are just mishmash of stuff. It's baby filler time.
Yeah.
It's stuff that you set your kids in front of the TV. And all I'm saying is the same thing that used to be said of 1960s cartoons.
Oh, for sure. Every generation, same thing, right? Yeah.
Every generation says the same thing over and over and over. But it's gotten to the point now where I, as a fan of animation, don't watch animation anymore.
Yes.
There are there's a select few number of things that I will watch, only because they break the mold or they delve into new territory. Claws is an example of something where they're taking the best of both worlds. They're taking the best of 2D animation, blending it with the computer, and making it work in a way that is fresh.
Yeah.
And then you get other stuff. I'm not going to name stuff, but you get other stuff that's just dribble. It's stuff that you start to watch and you just go, what?
Yeah. I know. And then people are like, well, what makes, why do you have the authority to criticize? And I'm just like, yeah, but there's just stuff that looks good and then stuff that doesn't. Well, but again, that's a subjective critique, because with every generation, our tastes are different than our forefathers, right?
Well, that's partially true. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is that we are all the consumers. Yeah. Everybody in the world is a consumer of animation. I mean, if that's what you want to consume. And so as a consumer, you have the right to critique it, whether you think it's good or bad, or if you're indifferent about it, whatever. You have that right because you are the consumer of it. So yes, you and I, as lovers of animation, have the right to critique anything that we want based on our own personal feelings of what's right and wrong to a certain extent.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one of the key issues with any animation that's done today. Any animation, whether it's 2D animation, 3D animation, or the hybrid, Toon Boom type stuff with the rigs and the characters, and there's this sameness to each area. 2D Toon Boom stuff looks the same. 3D animation, I mean, God bless Pixar for doing what they're doing and carrying it through, but it's all the same. I mean, look at their latest one, Soul. I can't really tell the difference stylistically between Soul and that other one about the Inside Out.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm my fandom right now has shifted, and this is upsetting for me to say. I've always been such a big Disney person. But my fandom now, my loyalties are shifting more towards Spa Studios and what they've been up to, and of course Klaus was, a big reason for that. But I think going back as far as Rio with the birds and how they were animated within 3D, and looking at the model sheets, the 2D model sheets, and so I find my my inspiration now comes from what Sergio is up to, and I'm just sort of hungry for the next leak from their creative mind.
yeah. Someone emailed me the other day, because every so often I get these random emails from people on my Facebook page where they'll just ask me questions about, how do I get into animation, or what can I do to better my skills? And because I've got a website that's set up for that.
Yeah.
It's sort of an extension of the teaching without me actually having to teach. It's just a body of stuff that you can go through.
Yeah.
But I had someone email me just the other day saying, where did I think 2D animation was going to go in the future? And I said, well, who knows? Number one, I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell the future. But in general, you can sort of look at the history of animation. And I've written a book on the history of animation, just, for the history course that I was teaching at Sherlock, I wrote a book on it. And it was interesting in my research. What I found was that from the year 1900, if we take that as sort of the benchmark start of the century and of animation, although there's a buffer of 2 or 3 years, one way or the other.
Yeah.
But 1900, animation has been divided into 30-year segments. You've got 1900 to 1930, which was the developmental stage, where you've got, Stuart J. Blackton and Gertie and the Dinosaur and Winsor McKay and all the sort of formative stuff, taking comic strips and trying to make them move, and all that mishmash of stuff, all silent, if you want to call it the silent era. I also call it the developmental era of animation. Then from 1930, 1929, Steamboat Willie and sound, to 1960, we have what we consider in animation as being the golden era of animation. Warner Brothers, MGM, Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, theatrical short films, where they're 7 minutes in length, and they're all completely animated in classical 2D animation.
Yeah.
1960. And then we have the turnover to television animation, which took place when Hanna-Barbera started up their studio after MGM shut down. Hanna-Barbera formed their studio. 1960, 30 years to 1990 was sort of the heyday of television animation. Hanna-Barbera dominated the first 20 years, you could say. They definitely dominated 1960s, and then they overflowed into the 1970s with spin-offs of everything that they had created, which was also sort of the low point of animation as well, that then resurged back up again into 1990 with television animation coming back up again. And then you've got the overlap at that point with from 1990 through to the present of theatrical features. Now, it's also the section of time where 1990 is roughly around when computer animation kicked in as well. So we call it the computer era too. And so right now with 2020, we're at the end of a 30-year period where hopefully we're going to blend into something new and different, or, whether it's holographic animation or
it just might be, because I'm sure you've seen the videos of Glenn Keane sketching in the air. And now when you buy your Oculus Rift and that, you can model in 3D and produce a production-ready 3D model with the controls. So I think you're right. We are very close to a three-dimensional interactive holodeck kind of situation.
Yes. So we're at the end of that 30-year period. Again, I'm just using this as a generalization. That, and there's always like a 5-10 year overlap where something else will blend in. and permeate the area. But yeah, it looks like it's time for a reset of some sort, where something is going to kick the industry in its butt and say, let's try something different here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting time period, and I just think the fact that technology-wise, the fact that I can have a studio right here at my desk,
I know,
and COVID notwithstanding,
yeah,
the fact that everything has become online now. Like I've just started a new job as a storyboard artist on a new television show. I'm working at home.
Yeah.
I can be back in my underwear again.
Yeah. Yay.
Too much information.
Yeah.
But,
full circle though. Full circle.
It's on right now. Yeah. So it's cool that you don't require outside aid. Anybody can be an animator now, which is both good and bad. But there's that flexibility now that with maybe $2,000-3,000 worth of investment and a couple of subscriptions to whatever software program you want, you are your own animation studio.
Yeah, it's a great time for the independent, meaning the hobbyist. There are people who were not given access to a program like Sheridan because they want to get into animation on that hobbyist level, so they didn't necessarily have the drawing skills, right? They wanted to make their own films that were more NFB kind of out there abstract stuff, and that's not what a program like Sheridan promotes, right? It's very traditional feature film approach kind of thing.
Yeah, they're industry feeders.
Yeah,
they're feeding industry.
Yeah. So now we're at that time where, just like you said, if you've got a couple grand, you can start making your own films, and hopefully to the benefit of the audience.
As opposed to spending 20 grand to go to Sheridan.
There you go. Yeah. But I was wondering if we could go back in time a bit, and you're at Melvan and you're finishing up on Inspector Gadget, and there are other productions that come along, Care Bears and this type of thing. But at some point you decide to become an author.
Yeah. That actually happened after I had finished working in the studio. So just to follow the timeline, I'll just rip through this quickly.
Sure.
So after Gadget, I took about 6 months off to recharge my batteries, came back to Nelvana, starting on Ewoks and Droids in the layout department. I started on the Ewok show because they had started production first. So I did 3 shows of Ewoks, got really tired of drawing trees really fast.
I bet, yeah.
And because I love perspective, so that's what Droids was all about, perspective drawing. Trees, there is no perspective. It's just trees.
Yeah.
And so I asked to be flipped over to the Droids crew, and so worked on Droids. I started off because I'd never done layout before. Again, it's like every time I started Nelvana, I'd never done that before. So, but because I had the training in perspective, I knew how to draw environments and such. So I started off as a junior assistant animator or layout artist, on Ewoks, then became a assistant layout artist on Ewoks, then became a senior layout artist on Ewoks, then flipped over to Droids, and I was a senior layout artist on the entire Droids episodes, all of them.
And those backgrounds are very technical, like a lot of architecture and kind of thing.
Yeah, it required a lot of perspective. And, that was a fun show. I really enjoyed. That was probably one of the most enjoyable productions that I had ever worked on. Aside from the next one that I'm going to talk about, the fun thing about Ewoks and Droids was that, like people today, when you walk into an animation studio, you see this nice, sparkling, clean building with clean floors, and it's usually little cubicles here and there and everywhere in a wide open space of some sort, and everything is clean. There was absolutely nothing clean about the production on Ewoks and Droids. We were on the second floor of the Jarvis building, which again, remember, was a car dealership.
Right.
So this would have been the upper offices of where the accounting people would have been, and it was a grimy area. It was a very large, spread out area, a weird shape. It had like L's and Z's and all sorts of weird. It was like a rat maze.
Yeah.
But we were all in there, and we were all just sort of congregated together so that I could yell 30 feet across the room to a layout artist who was 10 layout artists away, and everybody else would hear me. But the nice thing about working on that production was that everybody that worked on it wanted to have fun. And so it wasn't so much about the fact it's weird to talk about it, but at the time period that we were working on it, we never thought, because I was a huge Star Wars fan. Like I was the kid who in high school in 1977, before I got into college, I wore Luke Skywalker outfits, and I had the laser. I made a lightsaber out of a golf tube and a light, flashlight, and ran around school and at Halloween got kicked out for wearing an outfit. So I was a huge Star Wars fan.
You were ahead of your time.
I was, but I love Star Wars. I was a huge Star Wars fan, and so when I got the chance to work on the show, not once, I swear to you, not once did I think, I'm working on a Star Wars production.
Really?
That's so cool. It was never like that. It was just like, oh, there's John Flagg. Hey, John, how's it going? Because we had worked on something previous, and there was Howie Parkins and Chris Minns and Rob Sadler and Paul Bouchard. All these guys, we're all working together, and it was about the camaraderie of the guys being together, and some girls as well. It was mostly male dominated at that time. I think we had 4 or 5 girls in the department, but it was just the fun that we had. We were constantly playing practical jokes on each other, always. Like there wasn't a day that went by practically that there wasn't some sort of a joke being played. I remember, and most of the times it was me that was pulling them, but there was one that I always hold up as the highlight of the practical jokes, and that was we were in the studio, and Eric Chu, who was one of the layout artists, mistakenly said to us, "My parents are coming to visit from I can't remember where they were from, China, some Oriental country." They had come to Canada to visit the studio to see where he worked. And he made the mistake of saying this to all of us. And he said, "Don't do something stupid to embarrass me." Well, like that's a perfect invitation.
Yeah.
So he walks out the door to greet them at the front door downstairs. I grabbed 4 or 5 different layout artists around us, and I said, "Quick, grab his desk, everything that's on his walls, take everything down. Let's move it out onto the balcony." And so within 2 minutes, we had his cubicle stripped bare.
Yeah.
There was absolutely nothing there. It was like, when you see on movies when they take out everything, there's like little spaces where there's dirt around an area that the picture was on the wall. It was like that. Like his floor, you could see the imprint of where his floor was because there was dust around it and everything. So we stripped everything out of his entire area clean. Then I grabbed from one of Don Lee was one of the production runner people on the show. I grabbed a clipboard from her and then stood there by the door. He comes into the door and he turns around the corner and he says, "This is the layout department. This is where I work. And here's my desk." And he gestures and his desk is gone. And the look on his face was absolutely priceless. He was just like sort of dumbstruck. It's like, what have you done?
Oh, man.
And his 2 parents are standing there. They don't, they speak very little English, and they're looking at him like, what's going on here? And I walked over to him with a clipboard and I said, "Hi, can I help you? You're a guest here. You should have a guest visitor card. I don't think you're allowed to be up here." Well, he flipped out on us.
Wow.
But we were just killing ourselves with the fact that we could accomplish this with like a 2-minute period to just rip it out, and it was hilarious.
Well, you had to vent it somehow because Droids wasn't a gag-based show, right?
No, there was a lot of pressure on the show. We had a lot of work to do. We cranked the stuff out, and it was good. I've watched a few episodes recently, and it's a fun show.
Yeah.
But so we went through Droids. that was one of the best times that I had. But it was the camaraderie of everybody.
Yeah.
So after we had finished Ewoks and Droids, I think there was another big. No, we worked on Care Bears, the movie, the second movie, doing layouts, and then I believe there was a big layoff because then they were moving to the Atlantic studio. So they shut everything down, and we end up, spending like a month and a half doing nothing. We moved to the Atlantic studio, got everything set up there, which was a really nice studio. And we moved in. We started doing Care Bears on that at that studio. And I was in the layout department. And at that time, this would be 1985, 86. And we had found out that there was a studio. I don't know if those of you that are in animation will know the Liberty Village area, which is sort of the hub of where most of the animation studios are right now. So the Atlantic Street studio was on one side, and then on the far side, I believe it's Dufferin. There was a big mill building there. It was like 6 or 7 stories, really old building. They had converted that into little office cubicle buildings and whatnot, or offices. Anyways, 2 guys who had worked for Hanna-Barbera had moved into Toronto and decided they were going to set up a farm studio and called it Make Believe. And they were getting farm work from Hanna-Barbera, from Ruby Spears, from where else were they getting stuff from? Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears. Can't remember the others. Anyways, they were doing Flintstone Kids, Punky Brewster, Smurfs, Laser Tag. Those were the key shows they were doing. Anyways, we had heard that they were doing stuff down the street. So what I did was I went over one lunch period, one lunch break, and introduced myself to them. And they said, "Oh yeah, we got tons of work if you're interested in doing it." So I said, "Sure, I'll take it." So I took a bunch of stuff and I said, I'd be doing it freelance. And so what I ended up doing was working on Care Bears 9 to 5. And then at lunchtime, I would go down the street up to the studio, pick up my stuff, Smurfs, Flintstone Kids, whatever, go back to the studio to Nelvana, work on Care Bears for the rest of the day, drive home, have supper, and then work till probably about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on Smurfs and Flintstone Kids.
Man.
Go to sleep, wake up the next morning, drive into Toronto, go to Nelvana, 9 to 12, walk down the street, pick up new stuff, drop off the old stuff, back to Nelvana. So this was the cycle. Yeah. So at Nelvana, I was making, I believe, about $650 a week doing the layouts, because they were working on a quota system where you had to have 10 layouts done a day to get your base salary, and then anything above the 10, you would get an overtime bonus.
Right.
So, it was a piddly amount of money that we were getting on that stuff.
They, like, if you had a 3-peg pan, that was one layout?
No, it counted for 3.
So every field, peg was okay. Yeah,
it was a field system, fields that you had. So yeah. And it was always by 12 fields. So like a 6 field, an 8 field, a 10 field would all count as a 12 field, single field. Right. But if you had 3-peg, A to C pan, it would count for 3 fields.
Oh, that's great.
So we developed little systems where I personally, again, in the development of trying to make things work economically, I would always go in and separate my scenes out into hard, medium, easy. So I'd have the hard stuff would be the 12-field long shot stuff. Medium stuff would be 2 characters in a waist-up shot, and the easy stuff would be the close-up scenes. So you go in, you do maybe 2 close-up shots to warm yourself up, do a hard shot before lunch, so you'd have 3 scenes done, and then you'd come back after lunch and do 2 or 3 medium shots, a couple of easy ones, and another hard one, and you get your quota by the end of the day. Right. So you sort of mix it up that way. Yeah. So I developed this little system of how to get my quota done. So going through the Make Believe and Nelvana shift back and forth, at the end of the month, I would look at my paycheck, and I saw Nelvana was like $650 a week, which comes out to what, 2,000, something. Good at math, huh? $2,400.
I'm just shaking my head and nodding because I'm not even going to try.
Let me put it down. It's easier if I do it by week. So I get $650 per week at Nelvana.
Yeah.
And then I pull out my make-believe check and it's $2,000 for the week.
Oh.
So I'd be going, wow, like I'm doing this at night and this is all I'm making during the day.
Mm-hmm.
I should just go full time on this and I could probably triple what I'm making per week. And I'd be laughing. So I ended up quitting Nelvana. I just cold turkey just walked in one day and said, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I walked off the job. And then I went over to Make Believe. They set up a desk for me and we worked away on that stuff for probably about 6 months. And then I started noticing, because a couple of other people came with me. Howie Parkins was one of them who came with me. And I guess he knew the writing was on the wall because he had heard that Atkinson's had started up on Teddy Ruxpin. So he basically jumped ship and drove up to Ottawa and started working at Atkinson's. So then I walked in one day to Make Believe and dropped off my stuff and said, so what else have you got for me? And they go, oh, didn't we tell you? We're shutting down. We have no more work. And I went, oh, great. So I got on the phone. I called up Atkinson's and I asked to speak to whoever was in the posing department because I had heard through the grapevine that they needed some posers. So Mark Sevier comes on the line. Mark was a college guy with me. He was in my second year group, good friend. He comes on the line and I go, hi, Mark? He goes, hey, Brian, how's it going? I said, pretty good. What's up with you? Oh, we're working away on Teddy Ruxpin. You want a job? Yeah. Okay, come on up. I said, okay, I'll be there tomorrow.
That's awesome.
And so I drove up the next day, 6 hours to Ottawa, got to the studio, walked in the door. They said, here's your desk, literally.
Yeah.
It was like, here's your desk. At lunch, Mark said, you're going to need to find a place to live. He said, and the building we were in was an old renovated church, really cool place to work in. And it was the old Crawleys, the Wizard of Oz series, the really old Wizard of Oz series from the 1960s.
Yeah.
That was the studio that did it.
Yeah.
So he said, just walk up and down the street here. We were in a residential area. So just walk up and down the street and you'll find someplace that's renting. So I walked down the street, went down a path to the next street behind the studio. And sure enough, there was a house. The first floor and the basement were for rent. So I knocked on the door and the landlord happened to be there. And I said, I'm interested in renting the place. He said, $600 a month. I said, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So I slept overnight that night because he said, you're in right now.
Yeah.
The next day I went into the studio, worked for the day, came home at night, went down to Zeller's, bought a television set, slept on the floor.
Priority, you say?
Yeah. Then the next day I went down the street and there was a furniture shop just at the corner and I bought an L-shaped couch. And the guy said, well, what do you want me to put it into? Like, where's your truck? I said, no, I live down the street. And I said, I'll just carry it down. So I'm 26 years old. I'm full of energy. So I hoist the thing on my back. I'm carrying this one couch down the street into the house. And I run back and I grab the other part of the L-shape and then ran back, grabbed the cushions. And I slept on that the next night. So then I got all moved in and stayed there. So we were working on Teddy Ruxpin, which was a really fun show. And again, another great studio to work at. That studio, more than any other, was more about the camaraderie than the actual production itself. There were always some sort of a social thing going on where, we would go to a dance one night, we'd go bowling together. We had hockey leagues that, we got into. We played ball hockey together. We'd go out because there was a school just next door to the church. We'd go into the field and we'd throw baseballs around or footballs around. It was wonderful. And there was just so many friendships that were built up during that time period. It was just great.
Yeah.
Bob Jakes was working there at the time. Kelly Armstrong, Jill Halliday was there. A number of people. I mean, so many that I can't mention.
Yeah.
But it was a great time working on that show. We did 64 shows. The interesting thing about that production was I went in there as a poser and we were basically doing key poses. So we would get the layouts from the layout department and they would have the rough poses and then we would key pose the animation. and then it would be shipped overseas to Taiwan or Taipei. I can't remember which it was,
Mm-hmm.
and they would do the final animation and backgrounds and everything. But there came a point, I think it was around show, it was, I want to say 28, that the layout department it was having a real problem keeping up.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in and spoke to the guy who owned the studio, or who was managing the studio, who was the father-in-law of the guy who owned the studio. And I basically just sat down with him and said, look, you've got a problem in your layout department.
Mm-hmm.
And here are the things that I see that are wrong. And these are the things that you should probably do to fix them up. And he said, well, can you do that? Like, can you take the department over? And so I did. I took the department over.
Mm-hmm.
And we revamped everything. Like we switched, because they were working on the old system. They had done Care Bears previously, the very first season of Care Bears before Nelvana took it over. And they were using that old system that they had used back then, which was like a special system.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't really understand how to do a series. And so what I did was I took what I had learned from Nelvana and Hanna-Barbera in particular, because
Mm-hmm.
Hanna-Barbera had the system down.
Yeah.
It was so incredible what they had. And again, I was into systems
Mm-hmm.
and the ways to make things efficient. And so I developed basically a Bible on layout,
Mm-hmm.
of how to do layout efficiently, and presented that to the layout artists that they had on staff at the time, and realizing that they were woefully understaffed,
Mm-hmm.
and that most of the people who were in that department didn't really know how to draw layout. So I started up a little teaching program for them to get them indoctrinated into the new system. Like, we set up a stock background system for the studio, because we're working on a 64 episode series.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's an overarching story. I think there were 3 overarching stories in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you're going to be in Teddy Ruxpin's house quite a few times throughout this entire thing, or you're
Yeah.
going to be on the airship, or you're going to be here or there. So we had to develop a stock background system where we have this shot of Grubby's house, or this shot of Gimmick's house, or this shot of Teddy's house.
Mm-hmm.
There might have been 20 or 30 different shots that we reused. So we set up a stock system where, if you knew that you had that, if the layout supervisor, who was me, knew that this was a stock background, you would simply say stock.
Mm-hmm.
And you would go into the library, and we actually set up a person who would handle the library.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would simply walk down and say, I need this background. She would photocopy it. You would take it, you would repeg it,
Mm-hmm.
label it, and then put it into the scene. So you didn't have to draw it. So
Yep.
you didn't get paid the full amount for it, because it was a reuse, right?
Right. Right.
Instead of getting, say, $25 a scene, you get 15 for a stock background reuse, because
Right.
you still have to do the poses as well, but you're just repegging a background.
Right.
So I helped to develop that system, and we just started ramping up and going. And so that carried through for the remainder of the 64 shows, and it worked out really, really well. We got the whole series done, and then we moved on to we did some anime. I moved in the animation department and worked on a show called The Meerkats,
Mm-hmm.
which was a television special. That was my first show actually doing animation.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never actually been a formal animator before that. So again, brand new,
Yeah.
new position.
But I
and
mean, you have this trial by fire pattern to your
Yeah.
career.
it seems to be that, yeah.
Yeah.
So then the next production we worked on was the ill-fated Yeast the Magnificent, which was a French co-production, which you look it up on the internet, it doesn't actually exist anywhere.
Okay.
You might find one little thing about it, but there's nothing. And I only have one piece of artwork from the entire show, which is a big splash effect that I did.
Right.
And that was it. But I think we worked on 3 episodes of that, and it just disappeared. It died.
Yeah.
And then the next production that they had up was Dennis the Menace, which I detested the comic strip of Dennis the Menace, and really did not want to work on that show at all.
Really?
But I didn't have anything else in line. And right place, right time.
Yeah.
I got a phone call from Lenora Hume, who was the production manager at Nelvana.
Yeah.
And she called me up cold turkey and said, I heard that you had worked on Teddy Ruxpin as the layout supervisor. Would you like to come back to Nelvana and be the layout supervisor on a new show that we're working on? that's going to be groundbreaking because it's going to use the very first computer animation in a television animated series.
Wow.
And that really intrigued me. And I thought, well, I'm really interested in this. I would really like to. So I said, well, how much is it paying? And she said, $600 a week. And I said, that's less than what I'm making right now.
Yeah.
And she said, well, that's what's in our budget. And I said, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick it out here. Even though I hated the idea of working on Dennis the Menace, it was getting, I think it was getting $700 at that time.
Yeah.
So I said, no, I'm going to pass on it. I'm sorry. So I'm shaking my head after the phone call thinking, man, I could be back home. My girlfriend lives in Brampton. We were dating for like about 7 years at the time. And who's now my wife, by the way.
Yeah.
She just pulled over to me and said, your wife. So,
as she should.
Yes. She was my girlfriend at the time. And I'm thinking, yeah, I really should be back, in Toronto area. I should just bite and take it.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to do. So the very next day, I got another phone call from Lenora. And she says, I should back up, because what I said was when I said no to the 600, but I said, I'll do it for 1,200.
Right.
And she said, no way, because I knew that's what the supervisor at Melvan was making at that time.
Yeah.
She said, no way, we can't do that. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it then. So then the next day she phoned me back up and said, okay, we'll take you for the 1,200. And I went, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I ended up regretfully, because I loved Atkinson's. I loved the people there. I loved working in the environment, and it was a great place. But so I regretfully left Atkinson's, came back to Toronto, and started working on the ill-fated show called Ultracross, which was the one that was supposed to be using the computer animation. So Ultracross, the basic premise of Ultracross was it was Scooby-Doo on motorcycles, basically.
Right.
Or Ultracross cycles. So they were this group of, it was a standard formula. There was the really hunky looking guy. There was the nerdy looking guy who had a pet, which happened to be a monkey in this case, not a dog. We had the really hot looking girl. We had the nerdy looking girl who was really super smart with computers and everything. And then we had the mechanic guy. And the idea was that these were Ultracross motorcyclists who would go around doing circus performances of all their jumps and leaps and stuff like that. But they were really secret agents.
Right. Right.
And so they would go around the world pretending to be these Ultracross motorcycle people, but they would actually go there to rescue. The very first episode we worked on was to rescue a scientist, an American scientist, who had been held in the bad side of Berlin, which is what, the east or the west? East.
I don't remember.
I think it's the east side.
Yeah.
Because the Berlin Wall was up then, right?
Right.
So this was the east and west. So it was the Soviet side of Berlin. He was captured and held there. And so the idea was that these guys had to, late at night, get on their motocross bikes and build this. I remember the layout. I don't know if you know, those of you that don't know, the Berlin Wall was not just a single wall. It was a demilitarized neutral zone double wall. So there was the good side, the American side, or the whatever side it is, west, I believe is what it is. The good side, a wall, no man's land with barbed wire and everything in between, and machine gun people on the top, and then the other side, and then the bad side. So the layout that they had was this ramp that would go up. So the motocross bike was supposed to come down the street and go up the ramp and over the the wall and onto the other side and rescue the scientists, and then somehow make it back to the other side with, I don't know where they got the ramp from the other side, but they got a ramp.
Right.
But the ramp was like, the wall is like this, and the ramp went like this.
Oh.
So the motorcycle comes ringing up like this, and it goes straight up in the air, but then somehow it goes 90 degrees and goes across a quarter of a mile of no man's land and lands on the other side. So anyway, we're working away on this show, and we're into show one, I believe show two. We were doing layouts for it, and I remember distinctly we were in a room. I was talking with the design people because we were working on this one episode where we had to figure out, how does this motorcycle fly across this space? Well, it has to have wings that pop out. Well, where are the wings going to pop out of? The gas tank?
Right.
You know?
Right.
So we were designing this, and we were arguing back and forth about the the validity of wings coming out of a gas tank
Yeah.
on a motorcycle.
I like
No,
how that was the issue, but not the ramp that went
no,
straight
the
up.
ramp was a no-brainer. It was, how are we going to get it to fly?
Yeah.
So we're sweating over this at the table. We're all hunched over, and suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I see Patrick come into the room. And so Patrick walks into the room, and he's carrying this empty box. And he walks over to a shelf that had all the design packs in binders on it, and he starts grabbing the binders and sticking them into the box. And so we sort of paused for a second. I'm looking at him. I'm going, "Hey, Patrick, what's going on?" He goes, "Toy company that was backing this show went bankrupt, so we're not doing the show anymore. So I need all your designs and everything that you're working on." So we grabbed the stuff that we were working on the table. So we're just sort of standing there dumbstruck.
Yeah.
And he has the box, and he's carrying the box out the door. And as he's walking out the door, I said, "So what are we supposed to do?" And he had just gone out the door, and his head came back in sort of cartoon-like. It was like this. He's walking out the door.
Yeah.
"Hey, Patrick, what are we supposed to be working on?"
Yeah.
"Care Bear." And we were standing at the table, and we all went, "Oh."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
But
man.
I went, "But I'm still getting $1,200 a week."
Yeah.
So I took it, and so we did the Care Bears, and we plodded along. But the problems started to crop up on that show, where the management began to really grind us on it.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing a show, I believe, every 3 days in the layout department. We had 40 people under me, and we were doing a show every 2 to 3 days. And then they came to me and said, "We need to cut the schedule in half. So we need it done faster." And I said, I remember distinctly the conversation. I said, "But you realize if we do it faster, it's going to look worse, because I can't go through and give revisions and get the stuff back in time to get the show out. So I put it exactly this way. I said, you're sacrificing the quantity or the quality for the quantity."
Yeah.
And she said, "Yes, we know that. Just get the shows out."
Wow.
So I said, "Okay, just so long as you understand what we're dealing with here." So we started pumping the shows out, and everybody was complaining, and the shows were going through. And then I got called down to the office, and they basically said, "The shows look like crap, and it's your fault." And
well, that sounds about right in terms of how management works.
And so I said, "Yeah, but we had this conversation. Remember? Quantity over quality. You agreed to this, and that's what you wanted." And she said, "Doesn't matter. It's your fault. You're fired." And so, boom, I was out of a job.
Yeah.
And so I'm back at home again with my parents, and I'm eating my Cheerios in my underwear in the kitchen.
Same pair of underwear too, from grade 7.
Yeah. And that's again when I went back to the pizza delivery thing, and I think that lasted about 4 months that I delivered pizza. I remember because it was over Christmas and it was very cold, and I can remember being stiffed lots of times because with pizza, those of you who have ever delivered pizza will know what I'm talking about. Is that the person who delivers the pizza has 30 minutes to deliver the pizza, otherwise it's free.
Right.
And so what some people would do is they would order the pizza, you get to the door. No, not you. It's my dog. You'd be sitting there knocking on the door for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Then someone would answer the door and go, "You're late."
Yeah.
"But I was here 5 minutes ago." "No, you're late." Yeah. And so, I got stiffed that way a number of times because then I had to pay for the pizza. It wasn't pizza that paid for it. It was the delivery person that then had to pay for the pizza. It came out of my salary.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was a very low point in my life.
Yeah.
Where I was not sure, because just before Christmas, I had proposed to my now wife. We were going to get married because I figured I had a job at Melvan, and I was in good shape. So then I lost my job, sitting eating my Cheerios in my underwear, delivering pizza simultaneously. And I got a phone call. And again, May seems to be my happy month. Got a phone call from Wayne Gilbert, who I'd worked with at Melvan.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I'm at Sheridan. I'm teaching here. Would you be interested in coming out and teaching layout? And I said, yeah.
Yeah.
So started in September, teaching at Sheridan.
Mm-hmm.
That was another trial by fire, because I had never ever taught formally.
Mm-hmm.
I had done YMCA stuff,
Yeah.
For little kids, but I had never taught adults.
Yeah.
I want to call them that. And so again, trial by fire. I walked in the door. They said, you're teaching a layout. There was no layout course at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a perspective course, but there was no formal layout course.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if I just backtrack a little bit, I remember on Care Bears, as the layout supervisor, I would have to look at people, with their portfolios. And I had a huge number of people coming from Sheridan. And I would give them a formalized test to do to see if they understood. None of them knew what layout was all about. And I couldn't hire any of them. I was hiring people, coming back from Ottawa to fill up the space. And it sort of clicked in my mind, what the heck is Sheridan doing? Like, they're not even teaching layout. So serendipitously, I get called to teach layout at Sheridan. So no curriculum whatsoever. So I had to write the curriculum like within 2 weeks, set up the entire first year course, and started teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically went back to my layout notes that I had written for Atkinson's and broke them down into a series of assignments to carry someone through from someone who knows absolutely nothing about perspective, to ramp them through 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective, environmental drawing, object drawing, character posing, all the things that you need for layout to get ready. And it was sort of my mental mandate that if you're going to take my course, at the end of first year, you're going to be ready to get a job in layout, in a studio. So that was sort of my mental thinking on that. What was interesting about that very first year was I did something to the students that no one would ever get away with nowadays in any type of a teaching environment. And this is sort of one of those legendary stories that I've had students from that year come back to me. And now this is 40 years later. No, not 40 years, because it would be, what would it be, 20 years later? No, 30 years later. 30 years later. Students that were in that class, and they regale me with this story about what I had done to them. So we had done this one assignment where it was a fairly simple assignment where all they had to do was follow some very basic instructions and just produce an environmental drawing. So like a 1 point perspective room with a 2 point perspective box that was supposed to look like a table.
Right.
That's all they had to do. I don't think anybody got it right. Not one person got it right. And so when I had collected all the assignments and brought them home and I was grading them, I was just going through each one of them and just shaking my head saying, what the heck? Like, can't you just follow a basic instruction? So I got so frustrated with the fact that nobody could get this right. And this was like after we had already gone through the basics of 1 and 2 point perspective for about a month and a half. And so I drove down to the Harvey's store and grabbed all the applications that I could grab, took them home, and I stuck them in all their folders, stuck one in every folder. And then the next day I came back to the class and I handed back their assignments. And I said, here's your assignments back. Nobody got it right. They opened up the folder and I said, if you want to work in animation, you better start to figure this stuff out pretty quick. Otherwise, you might as well fill that form out, because that's where you're going to be working for the rest of your life.
Right.
Okay.
Wow.
So it was like shock and awe, right? Dropping a bomb on them.
Totally. So mushroom cloud.
Yeah. So now fast forward to when students repeat this back to me, like I'm thinking nowadays, you hear these stories about other teachers doing this and how horrible it is and how dare you, mistreat or, belittle a student in such a way. This is so terrible. But every student that I get that comes back to me about this, they say that was the best thing you ever did. Yeah. That made me smarten up so quickly that I realized I do not want to work in Harvey's.
Yeah.
This is my passion. I want to be an animator. I better smarten up right now.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I felt good in the aftermath of that.
Right. No,
But
there are moments like that, and I had a moment at Sheridan with life drawing instructor Zimmerman. What was it?
yes, Werner.
Yes, he tore up one of my drawings in the middle of class, yelling at me, threw it in the air, yelling, and he wasn't speaking English to me when he was yelling, and I had no idea, and I'm super sensitive, right? So I was just like breaking down into tears, and I'm like, oh my God, and my anxiety is all triggered, and like you said, the sweats, and but it made me approach his class differently, and my growth began to start to hit the marks that he was, hoping the students would hit.
Right.
But yeah, there are moments like that where teachers they do something very, maybe not today, they don't.
No, not today. No, you can't do that today.
Yeah.
But anyways, I did this with the students, and this was because my mental approach at this point was I had just come out of the studio.
Yeah.
I knew from all the experience that I had on all the other productions, you got to be top notch in order to be in the studio and stay there. And if you're not, you're going to be in trouble. So this was my mental attitude of conveying this to the students bluntly. And I think that's sort of the approach that I've always wanted to take and have taken, is that I'm blunt, but I'm truthful.
Yeah.
And I don't want to appear hurtful to anyone. So I will never belittle a student personally.
Yeah.
I will only attack their artwork. And I tell them this at the very beginning of every year, is I say, I don't know any of you. And I'm never going to really get to know who you are as a person.
Yeah.
The only thing I ever see from you is your artwork. Yeah. And my job as an instructor is to critique your artwork, to teach you the principles, to try and convey that information to you some way, give you an assignment that allows you to take the information that you've gotten and show me that you understand it through an application of an assignment. And then for me to assess whether or not you've done the assignment appropriately. And if you haven't, to point out the errors that you've made and what you can do to fix it up. Yeah. Yeah. It's my job.
That's I had a past guest. We were talking through Messenger, and she was saying that she always found that you were very blunt, and it was upsetting to her. And I said, I love that, because I always knew I was getting the truth, and it was on me to process it and move forward, right? But I had true data. Like you can make decisions based on data, right? And whenever you would critique work, it was true data, and so it led to a better decision making process, as opposed to when somebody is like, kind of tiptoeing around things and that.
Yeah.
And that's what made. I came into school one day, and Dave and Ann Shepstone we always sat together, and so they came up to me one day and they said, your model sheet is up on the wall. First of all, I'm like, you're full of shit. There's no way, just whatever. Don't mess with me today. I couldn't afford a coffee today. It's a bad time, right? Yeah. And it was true, though. You had put my model sheet up on the wall where that meant a lot, because I knew that in the process of that assignment, there were a lot of critique notes from you. And I knew that if my model sheet got put up on the wall, it was a true gesture of it wasn't like tiptoeing, it wasn't done as a way of like a social promoting me through, right? It was, if it's up there, it must be up there because it deserved to be up there. Because the students always knew where they stood with you, which was the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that was always the approach that I wanted to take. And it worked in certain instances, and it didn't work in other instances, like you said. Yeah. I recognize that, that as you go through the process of teaching people, like when I look at my career of teaching of 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
I would think it's safe to say that I've seen several thousand students
Mm-hmm.
in my career. And from that assortment of students, you see every kind of student that you could possibly imagine, all the way from why are you here to you shouldn't be here because you should be in a studio. You see
Right.
that full spectrum,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the artistic level of the student, but then there's also the personal level of how much can that person handle
Mm-hmm.
in a given circumstance, like how forcefully can you come across with your critique. And I tried to temper that as much as I possibly could. You try to read body language, or you try to read, visual cues of the person's face, like if they're about to break down and start crying, well, you better pull back now.
Right. Right.
And I would, what I often did, and I only found this out recently, is like if you know me personally, I'm a very jokey type person. I like
Mm-hmm.
to joke around, I like to have fun, I
Yeah,
like to
that
laugh.
did not come across as an instructor, though.
But what I would often do sometimes is maybe just as a reflex would be a nervous laugh. Like,
Right.
if you saw something that looked really bad that a student had done, I would
Yeah.
sort of laugh out loud. What? And I only recently found out that one of my students, they took that very negatively. They felt that I
Right.
was laughing at them personally,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it really offended them. And they said that from that point on, I didn't want to listen to you anymore. And
Right.
it was awkward for me finding this out after the fact. I wish they
Yeah.
had told me that right up front, because then we could have done something to sort of mend the situation to make it work a little bit better.
Yeah.
But again, it's trying to figure out what does that person need at that point in time, what's their emotional state, and you try and deal with that. But
Yeah.
it's so difficult because you're also in the back of your mind thinking to yourself, I got to get these guys ready for studio.
Yeah.
You know,
100%. I just finished up a contract teaching for a year and a half. 3D animation course. The college took it over from a college that went belly up overnight, and they brought me in to finish off their education. And yeah, I relate to that so much. The way you critique one person, even though you have your own natural way of delivering your information to people, you do have to keep looking at them and make sure that you're not pushing them over that line of breakdown. Although
yeah,
I did find it healthy to walk them right up to it sometimes.
yeah, yeah,
Because students, and it doesn't matter how old the student is. I was teaching people that were, pushing 30, and I was teaching people fresh out of high school, and there was a mixture there, but there was a mob mentality that sort of equalizes everybody. And
mm,
the I would have students who were the more mature react the most affected by, like, oh, you hurt my feelings type thing.
yeah,
And then I would have
yeah,
the youngest students be like, yeah, okay, I'll go back and fix it. And
yeah,
it was always a minefield of, especially in today's day and age where everybody is offended by everything too. It's
yeah.
quite
I, I
tricky.
always I always used to preface my classes when I first introduced myself. I'd go through, who am I, where am I from, type thing, and then into the introduction of what the program or the course that we're dealing with is all about. And then I would always preface going into everything by saying, look, I know each of you are different. You're all coming from different levels and different mindsets and everything. I am going to approach this at this level,
Hmm.
which is sort of my baseline level of, you're in college, you're just starting out. This is where I would expect you to be if you were going into a studio. And that is my critique level there. But I'm going to
Hmm.
start you off here. Not
Hmm.
that I'm going to be namby-pamby. Like if you make a mistake, I'll point out your mistake.
Yeah.
But I said between those two areas there, if you want me to move from here to here, I'll move up. You have to tell me.
Hmm.
Like pull me aside and say, I want to go to this level. Or
Yeah.
if you want me to treat you like you're in a studio, like hardcore, I'll treat you that way.
Yeah.
You let me know.
Yeah.
And every time, like again, 33 years of teaching, I probably had 6 people actually take me up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And those 6 people have done amazingly well in the industry. Like they are directors of films that have been nominated for Oscars.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Those people. And, when you hear someone say something like that, when they come to me and say, yeah, treat me like I'm in a studio, I want it. That person is dedicated to it,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're going to go far because they're driving themselves.
Yeah.
And so I took that on, and I would treat them as if I was in a studio. But then there are other people that I wouldn't treat. I wouldn't say coddle them,
Mm-hmm.
but I would be easier on them and try to sort of gently take them through the stuff. So there was a huge range.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I know I offended some people, and other people, they probably think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread when it comes to teaching.
You're always going to have that spectrum, when you're,
yeah,
yeah,
be there.
Yeah.
So if we back up now to your original leading question for this,
yeah,
the books.
Yes, the books.
So after I'd started teaching the first year, which was layout, again, I had to develop the curriculum myself right on the spot. And basically, as I was going along, I was changing things, adapting, moving along. So that by the time I got to the second year, and I was doing it for the new first year class, I had changed things around.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what worked, what didn't work, swapping it out. And then what ended up happening was I would write out notes for each assignment.
Mm-hmm.
That basically laid out, here's what the assignment is all about, and here's what you have to do. And then I would go in late at night to the photocopier at Sheridan, and I would photocopy up 30 sets of these notes for each class.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, we had 4 classes that were running, so I had to do 120 copies of these things and staple them. And
wow.
I'd show up to the next class, and I'd hand them out and say, here's your notes for this class.
Yeah, this is before PDFs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be in there late at night, and my wife would often say, where are you going? And I'd be saying, well, I'm going in and I'm photocopying notes. And she'd be going, man, write a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get it published. And so I ended up taking the final set of notes that I had put together, fairly thick set of notes, and spent about a year and a half just rewriting it all.
Mm-hmm.
And getting it all formalized into compartmental, like a logical format.
Mm-hmm.
And I went around to a couple of publishers, and they were all saying, no, too narrow a field. We can't sell these because it's animation
mm-hmm.
and it's layout. And how many people are we going to sell it to? 3?
Right. Right.
Yeah, but students that are taking my course, there's 100 of them that will buy the book. Well, we can't justify printing up, 5,000 books for those 100 people.
Yeah.
So I realized that my publishing avenue was narrowed down to the point where I had to publish it myself.
Right.
And so I just shopped around for printers and found a printer that would do it at a decent price, and printed them up. And I actually ended up binding them all myself.
Wow.
With the Sherlock's binding, I would sit there at night, instead of photocopying, I was punching books.
Yeah.
And,
I had no idea. So all these, because I've got all your books here. So, so that layout book was all handmade.
Oh yeah, that has my fingerprints all over it.
Wow. I got to put that in a Ziploc bag now.
Is it signed?
I don't think it is, actually. I didn't have that foresight back then. No, I was too scared of you, probably.
Yes, yeah. So anyways, that's how the layout and design made amazingly simple.
Yeah.
I was actually going to call it layout and design made amazingly simple for the amazingly stupid, is what I was originally going to call it.
Right. Yeah.
Because that was the time period that the idiot books had come out.
Right.
Macintosh for idiots, or French for idiots, or whatever.
Yeah.
But one of the deans saw the cover that I was going to put on, and he said, "No, you can't put that on there." So I just shortened it down to amazingly simple.
Yeah.
So that was the first book that I did, and I just sold it at that time. I could just walk in the door with a box full of books and say, because the dean at the time had said, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So I would just walk in and say, here's your book that you need. It's $35. Hand over the cash. Yeah. And I would just swap books for cash right on the spot. But I only made enough up for the students at that time. So then a couple of years later, or I think it was the very next year, because I did basically a book a year from that point on. The next one I did was character design for animation, and then I did animation, the basic principles. Then I went back and did another layout book called the Advanced Layout and Design Workbook. Then I went back and did another character design book, which is an animation course, drawing course, which is assignments for character design. And then it just sort of spilled out. There's a number, I think there's 10 books altogether. I can't remember. On various aspects. Just as the need arose, I would write a book that would sort of take over the notes type thing.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to the point where, was Carla Collette in your class?
In Miramichi, she was our life drawing instructor.
Okay.
Yeah.
She it may have been before or after you. I'm not sure which. I believe it was around.
I think she did the summer program at Sheridan.
Yeah, and I think it was in '93 is when she did it. She came in and Carla was an amazing person. She was so gung ho. She basically came into the summer program with her kid and was taking the course. And she pulled me aside one day and then introduced herself to me because I didn't really know who she was, and said, I'm working at Miramichi. I'm an instructor. What you should really do is you should get yourself out there. And of course, this is '93, so it's just after the internet had started up. I believe the internet started around '91 or something like that. So she said, you need to get yourself a presence on the internet. I'm going, what's the internet?
Right.
And so she was the one that really pushed me to get it online and set up a website and start to really develop the brianlemay.com, because I said, well, what am I going to call it? She said, use your name.
Yeah.
You've got to get that imprint out to the public, and your name is the best thing. So I balked at it at first.
Yeah.
And so the website is brianlemay.com, but it's actually called the Animated Cartoon Factory, which, because I was publishing the books, I had to have a company. And so I call it the Animated Cartoon Factory, which is the company name.
Yeah.
So she was the one that sort of inspired that flip over to the internet and getting it out to the general public. And so ever since that point in time, I have now expanded out over the years to, publishing maybe 2,000 or 3,000 a year.
Yeah.
And selling it to a lot of the mainstream college programs across America.
Yeah.
And now this isn't recently, but I guess about 10 years ago, it was translated into Mandarin Chinese and published. They're using it in one of their programs over there in China.
Yeah.
And
I get a little rub off of your success. And what I mean by that is every now and then I'll be talking to somebody somewhere in the US or overseas, and one of your books will, and they'll be, yeah, I got that book. And I'm like, yeah, but he taught me. So it's just kind of neat that to have seen kind of the early stages and see how far it's come is just so cool.
Yeah, it was never. I never did it for the money aspect of it. I was doing it for the information, getting the information out there, because I had, at that point when I was at Sheridan, I had the passion for teaching.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to help people to realize their dream of getting into the studio. And so I was doing whatever I could, whether it was through books or for, physical teaching or going online and putting up my videos on YouTube or whatever, to get that information out. And it sort of spun off into, now I've got students from all around the world who are contacting me and taking lessons from me, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so it's that idea that at least I'm helping some people realize their dreams.
Yeah.
It's tampered down quite a bit, because over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, the printing costs and shipping costs have just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
To the point where I can't actually print the books and make any money off of them.
Yeah.
Without charging an enormous price. Yeah. So I had everything converted over to PDF, and now they're all sent as PDF files.
Kindle and stuff like that.
Well, it's just a digital PDF file. If you contact me and you want it, you pay me for the book, and I Dropbox it to you.
Yeah.
And you can put it on whatever device you want.
Yeah.
So that's basically where it's gone from that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sheridan was a nice school to work with. Um, I was teaching there for 13 years total. So I was teaching, I taught pretty much every course there was because they kept cycling me through.
Mm-hmm.
When one instructor would retire or something like that, they just sort of shift me over. So again, the trial by fire thing, like
Yeah.
one year I was teaching background painting. I had never background painted in my entire life. But when I found out, usually I'd find out what course I was going to teach in May,
Yeah.
again, that magic month. So I'd be able to prep for September. So I would then inundate myself with whatever it was I was going to teach
Mm-hmm.
and learn as much as I could so that I was proficient at it.
Yeah.
That when September came along, I wouldn't look like a doofus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I taught background painting. I taught life drawing for several years. Character design, layout, storyboard, animation first year, second year, layout first year, second year, third year. It was the whole gambit of stuff that I taught. So that was educational for me
Mm-hmm.
as well to go through that entire cycle. And then I think it was in 95 or 96. I can't remember which it was. We were still doing the summer program, and the coordinator at that time just decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And it was about a week before the summer school had started, and the associate dean came to me and said, I need you to coordinate the course.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, what do I have to do? And again, trial by fire.
Yeah.
She explained to me what I had to do. And then what ended up happening was the following year, I believe that was the year that Charlie, who was coordinating the course, he left to work at Disney.
Yeah.
So that left the vacancy. By that point, Wayne had also left. And so I was sort of the next person theoretically with seniority. Not
Mm-hmm.
really, but I had the track record of doing the summer school, coordinating it. So they basically said, can you take over the regular program? So I did. And during that process, I sort of took it upon myself to revamp the entire program,
Right.
to go through everything. And so we gathered together all the instructors, and because everybody had been sort of talking amongst themselves or to themselves in their own head,
Mm-hmm.
It's not the way it should be. We need to fix things. And it's not, I think the real main problem with the program at that point in time was that, and this is not a slight on Charlie, it was inherited. This is the way it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And we did try to make corrections to it. I recall talking to Charlie several times when he was coordinator, of trying to coordinate
Mm-hmm.
the program, because the main problem was that I, as a layout instructor, felt that my course was the most important course.
Mm.
And whoever Charlie was teaching animation, Charlie felt animation was the most important course.
Right.
Or
Right.
so-and-so, Werner, thought life drawing was the most important course.
Yeah.
And there was no correlation or no coordination as to when deadlines fell. So we would just make up our own deadlines. So I had a deadline every 2 weeks, which would sometimes fall on the same date that an animation assignment was done.
Right.
So I would be in my layout class the week before my assignment was done, and people would be working on their animation assignment. And I'd be going, hey, you're supposed to be working on layout. Yeah, but tomorrow's class, my animation is due. And I'd be going,
Yeah.
that's poor time management on your part. But what can I do, right? I can't rip the stuff off their desk and say, no, you're doing layout now.
Yeah.
So I'd say, okay, do what you got to do, but just be aware that I'm not approving of this.
Yeah.
And so it was, as instructors across the board, we all got together, and I drew up this map of the entire semester and had it in columns down this way, week by week, and columns across this way, course by course,
Mm-hmm.
and had everybody take a stick-it note and say, okay, based on the outline that you have right now and the way you're running your course, what are your assignments and where are your deadlines? Write them down on the stick-it note and stick it up on your square.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked at it and we saw, holy crap, in this week, everybody's got an assignment due at the same time.
Yeah.
Can we do something to shuffle these around? Give this person an extra week or do something here or there.
Yeah.
And we began to really create a flow so that there wasn't as much stress within the entire program. Because that was one of the other big problems, is that there was a huge amount of stress. Because in 1996, this was I believe it's right around the time period that animation was going nuts
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And Sheridan College, their marketing department caught on to this, and they rode the wagon of animation is the big thing. And Sheridan suddenly became the place to go.
Yeah.
Because they got Michael Hirsch to make a quote that said, Sheridan College is the Harvard of animation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard that quote.
Yeah.
And so they rode on that hard.
Yeah.
And they took out ads in Animation Magazine and Millimeter and MPS and whatever magazine that had to do with filmmaking or animation. They ran ads in it saying Sheridan College is the best program to be in.
Yeah.
And suddenly the flow of applications that we got.
Yeah.
Because when I was teaching in the early years there from 88 to about 93, 94, before it really started taking off, we had portfolios, but the portfolios were just a mishmash of whatever you want to throw in.
Right.
There was no set, here's what you have to submit.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that I did as coordinator was I said, no, this is what you have to have for your portfolio. You have to have 2 drawings of a room from opposing corners. Pick a room in your house, bedroom, kitchen, living room. Sit in the corner and draw what you see in the opposite side. Then flip over to the other corner, draw the opposite.
Yeah.
Use 2-point perspective. Draw a drawing of your hand. Draw your parents or your brother or sister in some sort of 3 or 4 poses.
Yeah.
Do this. So I set up what the portfolio was so it was standardized.
Yeah.
Across the board. And then what ended up happening was I basically took over the review of all portfolios. Before it used to be all the instructors, but then they started dwindling out. They kept saying, I can't do it. Finally, it got down to me as the coordinator. I was the one that was looking at every portfolio. So not too many people realized this, but what ended up happening there was for the 100 positions that we had in the program, at the peak, we were getting about 3,000 applications every year. So 3,000 portfolios would come in, and I would have to go through every single last portfolio, and I had to grade it on a scale of 1 to 10.
Oh my God!
So again, and I didn't write any notes or anything on any of them. I simply gave a score. So in order, again, because I had to try to develop some sort of a system to get through this, because the portfolios would be due end of February, and then we had to send out acceptances by, I believe, middle of March. And so I had a 2-week window to do these 3,000 portfolios in this time period while still teaching courses. Right. So what I did was I ended up defaulting to, I would open up the package. There would be a stack of drawings. And I, in the outline, I said they had to be in this order. And what I would do is I would take it and fan it like I was going to flip my animation.
Yeah.
And I would flip the drawings through, and I'd look at each drawing a couple of times, and I'd decide whether or not there's no way this person's ever going to get in because they just can't draw, period.
Yeah.
And I would give them a mercy grade of 2 out of 10.
Right.
So basically, I was just going 2,
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And then if I saw some that I thought, yeah, this person has a chance, I would set it aside into another pile. But I basically just rifle through trying to find all the 2s and weed them out.
It's a full-time job, man.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. It was a fast process because you can tell at a glance whether a person has it or not. I mean, you look at enough portfolios and you can tell.
Yeah.
And besides, we're only trying to get down to 100, right?
Yeah.
So out of 3,000, you basically got your bell curve of, and it's the top 5%. So the top 5% of 3,000, again, asking you to do math. It might be 200 people.
Yeah.
Let's say 300 people that actually have a chance. So 300 out of 3,000, that's 10% actually. 300 out of 3,000 actually have a chance of getting into the 100 spots. So that's a simple no-brainer, right? You get rid of those other 2,700 portfolios that are just, you shake it.
Yeah.
And then you're down to the top 300. So now those 300 actually have to be assessed. So those are the ones that I would go through slowly and try to, weed out, okay, is this nobody would ever get a 10 because the thought process from the management was, if they get a 10, there's absolutely no reason why they should be here.
Right.
They should be out in the studio.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can teach that person. So, we would always, even though they looked amazing, we would never give it a 10. It would always be a 9 down to a 6.
Right.
And that was our range out of those 300. And so again, you get the bell curve of, the low end stuff. So the bulk of them were all down in the 6s and 6.5, 7s. And then it would get smaller and smaller as it got to the top. And usually you'd only have maybe out of those 300, you might have 5 that were like 9s.
Yeah.
And then the rest would sort of trickle down. And the bulk of them would be 6s. So then we'd simply take the top 100. And those were the people that actually got into the program.
Yeah.
So if you were one of those people in the past that did not get into the program, it's because you were weeded out if you got a number back that said 2, it was because it was a bad portfolio, or you just simply didn't make that top 100 spots. If you did make it in the top 100, well, I went through every portfolio and made sure that you were the right person for this position.
That's that's as a student, that's very humbling to realize how much effort was put into making sure that every spot went to somebody who stood the best chance, and it wasn't just because you could sign the tuition check you got your spot.
I didn't take it lightly. I never ever took that position lightly of looking at the portfolios.
Yeah,
that's like a sacred duty. I've got to make sure that these are assessed properly. So yeah, when it got to the point in '96 when animation went crazy, Disney had opened up their studio in Toronto, and we're working on Beauty and the Beast 2 or something. I don't know what they were. Goofy movie. That's what they were doing. That's when we lost Charlie. But at that point, Sheridan had turned this program that was doing really well. They sort of blew it out of proportion to the point where we almost couldn't meet the expectations of what they were saying we were.
Yeah.
We built it up so that within the program, we began to get students that started to dissent, like that, didn't feel we were doing what we should be doing. And so we got a lot of griping and complaining because they also upped the tuition at that point a little bit and made it a little bit more expensive. When I went to college, my tuition was a whopping $600 per year.
Oh.
And at the time that I was there, I believe if you were an Ontario resident, I think it was $6,000 or 6 or 8. I can't remember which it was.
Yeah.
And the government would pay half of that. So an out of province or international student had to pay 16,000 is what an international had to pay.
Yeah, it wasn't cheap.
Yeah. So we had a lot of people applying, and we had a lot of people that got in because they knew that they were the top, 100 out of 3,000 people, and they began to have this arrogance to them.
Yeah.
To know that I am the top. And so we started having a little bit of attitude issues with some students where they were back talking and, et cetera, et cetera. We had a major problem, I believe it was in 98 or 99 in the summer school program. The program had just sort of been spiraling as far as who we brought into the program. Originally, it was the International Summer School of Animation, where only out-of-country students could come. You couldn't be a Canadian resident to get into it. And then it dwindled down to out-of-province. And then it turned into, well, if you couldn't get into the winter program, you most likely can get into the summer school program.
Right.
So it became a poor man's alternative to, no offense to you, but it did start to turn into that. And the final year that we did it, a lot of the instructors refused to teach the program anymore. And I ended up carrying a lot of courses in the final year. And the students basically revolted. And they went to the president of the college and said, this is not what we paid for. And the college, turned their back on me and the other instructors and rescinded and said, okay, we'll give you your entire tuition back. And when you come back next year, you can get residence for free. So that didn't turn out well. So then the following year, they ended up shutting it down and not continuing on with it simply because it wasn't working as a general program.
Mm-hmm.
It just became the poor man's, because it was only 4 months, right?
Yeah.
It was like one semester, where the other ones were 2.
Yeah.
So so I continued on with the winter program, and again, it just the notoriety of the program got bigger and bigger, and it was weird because I began getting interviews on magazines, newspapers. I was on television a lot, promoting the program.
Yeah.
I sort of became a mini celebrity in the Toronto area, to the point where people walking on the street recognized me and knew I was the coordinator of the program, saying, "Oh, I've got a friend who wants to get into the program. Here's their name. Can you, see what they get, type thing," or just being in a store. Like I was in a video store once, and the girl said, "Oh, you're Brian Lemay," because I had to sign. This is back when you had to sign for the visa.
Yeah.
Signed my name, and she said, "You're Brian Lemay?" I went, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, I wanted to get into the animation program."
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it turned into that type of a scenario. But yeah, the program got bigger and bigger, and then we started allowing more and more students in. We expanded it out from three classes. We had 90 students. We bumped it up to 100. Then it went to 120. Then it went to 150, and we had to expand the number of classes. Because you couldn't have a huge cohort. We had to get more faculty in, so I was just hiring faculty left, right, and center, and then
the year I was there was a drawing test, series of drawing tests.
Yeah,
and I had so many panic attacks that day. So many times through that day, I thought I was literally dying, like having a heart attack, dying.
I'm glad you brought it up. The reason we had to institute that was because we had so many portfolios coming in. Like I said, 3,000. And now we go through the portfolios. The first couple of years that we had that system, we got students who came in and they would start doing their assignments and they'd be failing assignments. And then I started going back, because I kept a record of all the portfolio assessments. I started correlating the names. This person got 9 out of 10, but they just failed all their classes. And I began to think to myself, aha, someone got somebody else to do their portfolio.
Yeah.
They were literally forging their portfolio. They got someone else to submit the drawings for them. And so that's why we instituted the drawing test, is because someone might come in, they might get a 9 out of 10. I want to see you draw in front of me right now. And so we started doing that. And it was, the perspective drawing, the draw your hand thing. And that would give us, and what I would do is, because I kept all the portfolios, I would then take the drawing tests, compare them to your portfolio. And if they didn't jive, you did not get in. So it helped us weed out a lot of people that were cheating to get into the program, because that actually became very rampant at that point.
I bet it would. And, to me, that never made sense, though, why somebody would do that, because it would be evident on your first assignment what you can and can't do.
Yeah, it really was.
How it worked for me is I made it there went through the drawing test system, and then I didn't get in. And then I went home and I cried, and, because I had uprooted from Miramichi overnight. Like I came home on a Friday, told my girlfriend, now my wife, we're going to Ontario now. So, and we just abandoned our apartment basically. And, I ended up not getting in and crying, and knew that my family had already, very judgy. So now I was that I told you so story. But then a day or so later, I got a call. And was the receptionist asked me, a spot had opened up, and did I want it? And I'm like, oh my God, had no idea how I was going to pay for it. I'm like, yep, I'm there. And so it was just a very, very bizarre situation for me, but I expected to fail. because I'm a person that is with anxiety and stuff, very, very triggered very easily. And I don't test well. I get worked up into a panic. And
Right.
so I knew that morning before I even got dressed that what was about to take place would not be representational of
Yeah.
what I could do.
Right.
Just
But when
because I know who I am, how I,
yeah,
you know,
we always took that in with a grain of salt. Like
yeah,
we were aware, or I was aware of the fact because I was the one that was looking at all the stuff.
yeah,
None of the other instructors were involved in that. I was always aware of the fact that there would be that anxiety issue
mm-hmm,
with a lot of students. And so I always looked at the test with a grain of salt.
mm-hmm,
Now, in your particular case, and I'm just speculating based on what you've told me here, is that you would have been probably in that 6 range on your initial portfolio. And so
probably,
when you took that chunk of students in for the test,
mm-hmm,
you were in that grouping of the test, but you weren't close enough that you were within the 100. And so based on the test, you would have been put on the reserve list,
mm,
and you would have just missed by one person or 2 people getting in.
yeah,
That's how close you were to that top 100.
yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
it worked out, and I, you know,
you're
so
welcome.
yeah,
Although it wasn't me, it would have been the person who dropped out,
right,
right?
yeah.
So
Well, one person's failure is another
yeah,
person's success. Say,
yeah. So it's interesting when you say that. One of the other things that I'm very cognizant of within my teaching experience is that of the thousands of students that I have seen over the years,
mm-hmm,
um, often I'll run into people
mm-hmm,
in various situations, mostly at animation festivals or a comic book convention or something like that. The odd time in Home Depot, of all
mm-hmm,
places.
yeah,
I'll run into students and they'll say, "You remember me?" And I'll typically say, "Yes, I do." And
mm-hmm,
I normally do remember, most of the students. There's some students I have no recollection of them
right,
whatsoever because they're the ones, the wallflowers that sort of faded into the background.
yeah,
The ones that I remember you. Um, there's one student. The typical story that I give you is this: that we have the greeting for all the students that I would do to say, "Welcome to the program. This is what you should expect. Sleepless nights, long hours, blah blah
yeah,
blah.
yeah, yeah,
I'm sure, et cetera, et cetera." And then after that, I was walking down the hallway, and this guy comes running up behind me, and he goes, "Brian, Brian, Brian." And I turned around and I thought I was going to get stabbed or something. No, he's one of the students, and he goes, "I just want to thank you for what you said. And I want you to say," because I said, "Most of you, I won't remember your names,"
right,
right? Because
yeah,
there's hundreds of you, right? So he runs up behind me and goes, "My name is Jerry Bertolo. Do not forget my name." And since then, I have never forgotten Jerry Bertolo's name.
that's
So
awesome.
hi, Jerry, if you're out there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I've had students like that, where I run into them years later, and they say, "How are you doing?" And
mm-hmm.
I'll either remember them or I don't quite remember them. There's the odd student that I'm sorry, I don't remember you at all.
Well,
But
so many,
and,
so many.
well, yeah. And then on the downside, I mean, the ones that I really remember are usually the students that I had some sort of an interaction with them that it just sort of sticks in your mind, like
Yeah,
the Jerry thing, where
mm-hmm,
Jim Zubkovich is another example. Jim is the coordinator of the Seneca program now. He was my student, and during we had a portfolio assessment at the end of each semester, just to go through everybody's stuff and give them, pointers on what they should do to fix their stuff up.
mm-hmm,
And it always seemed to be a real nail biter situation for the students because they were all very nervous about presenting their portfolios at the end.
mm-hmm,
And it was usually a committee type scenario. I don't know. It was in A Wing, and I don't know if you recall the room, but it was this little projection room.
mm-hmm,
And it was set up like the bridge of the Enterprise, basically.
yeah,
Like there were 2 levels to it, and everything was built in. There were no chairs. It was just benches. And they
yeah,
had these little platforms in front that you could put your book on. And then in the front was a screen, in the back was a little projector. So we would run their films on the projector. So the student would come in, they'd lay out their portfolio, they'd give us their reel, they'd go out of the room. We, as the faculty, would sit there and we'd watch their film, look at their portfolio, and we'd come up with a general consensus of, yeah, this is what you should do to fix up your portfolio. And here's what you should focus on in next semester. And this is the stuff you should work on over the summer, et cetera, et cetera. And then we call the student back in and we give them this information. But it always sort of looked like a tribunal, because we'd be up on the upper level there, and they'd be sitting down in this one chair with a spotlight on them. And
the judges, right, way up top, yeah, like
Like
Captain
that.
Kirk at the Klingon.
Yes, the high
court.
tribunal.
Yeah,
Exactly. So the students would all, because we'd schedule it on a 15-minute schedule, and so the students would all be lined up outside. And so Jim was the next person to come in. So Jim was doing really well in the course, and so we had him in. We looked at his stuff. He went out. We looked at his stuff. We made comments. He came back in. We told him all about his stuff, and he said to me, he said, "Boy, the people out there are just sweating bullets. Like, they're really nervous." And I said, "This is back to the Nelvana thing with the desk."
yeah,
It just hit me. I said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And so I explained to him what we were going to do. So he agreed. And so here's what we did. I kicked the door open. I grabbed him by the scruff of the shirt and a pin, and I threw him out of the room. Okay.
Oh my God.
He did a tumble, a 360 tumble, and hit the wall on the other side. And then I threw his portfolio out. And I said, "If you ever show us crap like that again, I'm going to have you pulled out of the program." I turned to the next person. I said, "You next in."
Oh my, holy jeez. Oh man. How far did you let that go? Like, did you wait for them to get seated and settled before?
As soon as they came in, they relaxed. That was just for fun. And Jim was outside laughing his guts out. Everybody was going, "What's going on?" And he explained it to them. I came out and I said, "Relax. Okay, just relax.
Yeah.
Take it easy."
Jeez.
So I think that calmed a lot of nerves. And,
Yeah.
it was just having some fun, with the students.
No, it's incredible the amount of pressure the students put on themselves, especially the ones that really care, right?
Yes.
I used to get so angry. There were some students who'd be out partying every night and drinking. And I'd be like, first of all, how'd you even make it in? And if you're that talented, then why are you not trying,
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I used to get so upset.
An entire gambit of students that were like that you just,
Yeah.
Some of them you wonder why they're there, and others you think, I'm so happy that you're here. And I learned stuff from them. They learned stuff from me. I mean, it pushes me as an artist as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I mandated for myself was, if I was going to teach something, I knew that I had to know what I was teaching, and I had to be able to prove it to them. Like, that I should be able, as you said before, I should be able to sit down and go over your drawing and make it better, and explain to you why I'm making it better and how to make it better, and then saying, you do the same thing. Just follow these principles. So I didn't want to be that person that stood up at the front and goes, yada, yada, yada. This is the way we did it in the industry, blah, 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 blah. But I'm never going to do it myself. Do it. I'll judge you. I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to be able to get in there and with the students and actually physically do it. So a number of years later, with every assignment that I did at Sheridan and Seneca and Humber later on, I would always do the assignment with the students at the same time.
Right.
So I would always end up doing, if there were 4 classes, I would do 4 assignments and, show them what I was doing as I was going along. So that was interesting, that whole time period. And then what ended up happening at Sheridan was that they had the computer program since '88, but they wanted to build this new wing, this Center of Animation Excellence.
Yeah.
And Sheldon Levy was the president at the time, and he sort of took this reputation that he had built up over the years that he was president, 96, 97, 98, and mushroom cloud the entire program into this amazing Harvard of animation, and then went to the government and said, okay, we've got this world-class, excellent animation program. We need to house it in something appropriate, as opposed to this warehouse that we're in right now.
Yeah.
When we were in C Wing, which is basically a big barn. So they came up with this Center of Excellence building and touting that this is what would house the new animation program. So we did our dog and pony show and talked about, how great the program was and everything. They got the funding, millions of dollars to do it. And they built the building, and then we were stuck in C Wing. And they put the computer animation program and a bunch of other media programs into the new wing.
Yeah.
And we were going like, what the heck? Like we're the crowning jewel of the program, Sheridan College that you've been touting. We're still in this dirt area here.
Yeah.
Like what's going on? We're overcrowded. We're oversubscribed. Like, why are you doing this to us? We have antiquated equipment.
Yeah.
So then they said, okay, well, we'll build you new desks. And so we got new desks in, which was great. But then things changed, and Sheridan, they went with the degree program with illustration, and that turned out to work out pretty good. And then they decided that year they were going to turn Sheridan into not a college, but a polytechnical school, which meant that they would begin offering degree programs. And so the next program slated up after illustration was animation to go into a degree. So they came to me as the coordinator of the program and said, we want you to write the curriculum for this new program. So they outlined to me basically what the parameters were, that we were taking the 3-year program and turning it into a 4-year program. And that they were going to be able, one of the other things was, because it's a degree program, those extra courses that you had, like the English as a second language course or whatever they were, they had to double the number of those courses that you had to take in order for it to be a degree. So if that was a 2-hour course, we had to take out 2 hours of an animation course in order to supplement that one in.
Right.
So we ended up taking certain courses like animation and character design, which were 2 standalone courses. Animation was 4 hours. Character design was 2 hours. We now no longer had a character design class because that was taken over by the new extra class, and it was blended into animation.
Yeah.
So these were the things that I was sort of told I have to do in order to make the program work. So I began to balk at this. We had a program advisory committee meeting, and I was voicing my feeling that this wasn't right, and I was basically censured, told not to talk. They just wanted to run this thing through. And so basically I had to back off. And anyways, long story short, I ended up resigning from the program because I did not agree with it. I quit and left the program. And at that time, Chris Landreth had approached Sheridan College about doing his film Ryan, the computer animation film. They wanted to use the facilities at Sheridan. This was all happening around the time that I was having these problems. And I was called into the dean's office, and he said, some guy named Chris Landreth came in and wanted to do a film with us. And we told him to go away because we didn't think it was worth it. And I went, what? So he ended up going to Seneca and approaching them about the idea. At the same time, just after I had left Sheridan, I was lobbying with Seneca to get hired on there in their computer animation program to teach storyboarding. And the coordinator of the program hired me on as a part-time instructor and then introduced me to Chris. And Chris and I got together, and he asked me to do the storyboards for Ryan. And so we collaborated on that film, which ended up winning an Oscar for Best Short Film in 2005.
So amazing.
Which was really cool. It was an interesting project. He was very offhand. Like he had done these recordings with Ryan, basically gone in and just with a tape recorder and a microphone and just had conversations with him and wanted to turn it into this film. So we had discussed ways of doing this to make it all sort of blend together. So he had all these different little segments that he wanted to put together, and he would just verbally say, this is what I want to have done here. So because it was computer animation, and I had never done boards for computer animation or never worked in computer animation before, I just sort of went nuts. And I started boarding out stuff that after I showed it to him, when I presented it to him, he goes, wow, yeah, that's really cool. I love that. That's a great idea. But we can't do that with the computer. The computer won't handle that. So we can't do that. So a bunch of stuff got cut out, and various things got trimmed out. But anyways, we collaborated on it, where he would verbally tell me what he wanted, and I would go and do the storyboards and then present it to him. And then we'd back and forth until we had the basic film done the way he wanted it. And then he started doing the animatic, and then went into layout with the students from Seneca.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day he dropped it off to Larry and I. Larry DeFlorio was the coordinator at Seneca, and the two of us went into my office, because at that point in time, he had then hired me on full time, and I became the coordinator of the Seneca program, which I basically, at that time they had the computer animation program, and I suggested, let's make a 2D, 3D hybrid program. And so I wrote up the curriculum for a 3-year diploma program, sort of the anti-Sheridan program,
right?
Is what I wanted to create. So I took all the good things that worked at Sheridan and shaved out all the bad stuff and created a program for Seneca. The government bought it. We started up, and I became the coordinator of that program. So during that time, I was also working on Ryan as well. So Chris dropped off this videotape, and Larry and I went into my office, and we played the video of the film in rough layout stage. And I turned to Larry and I went, "This is not going to win an Oscar." And so he said, "Well, what's wrong? What do you think?" And I said, "Well, it's just cut badly. It means this doesn't need to be here. It needs to be back here in the film. And this should be over here. And this needs to be cut out completely. And we don't need that. We need this." And so we did some shuffling, and Chris came in, and we told him what, felt should have been done. And so he implemented all that stuff and shuffled it around. And then the rest is history. They produced the whole thing. It went on and got nominated, and then won the Oscar. And so it was kind of cool,
Yeah, very cool.
I didn't get the credit for it, but I was sort of a co-director on it. But the storyboard is fine. But it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool.
No, that's man, that is such a epic story. Having you on today has been epic. And I do have to end it because my memory card is about to run out of space. But I really hope you'll come back on, because I feel like there's a lot more to talk about.
Still the second half of my career.
Yes, exactly. Right. So if we can do a part 2, whenever it suits your schedule, that would be amazing. All right. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, Brian.
All right. Bye.
Bye. It only matters you create when you're drawn to it, drawn to it. Get creative and flex imagination. Write a song, you might hear it on a station. Do a painting of some pigs in a pig